learn after what we've seen just over the past 90 years here with the program?
Well, the biggest fallacy was when back in 1935, Social Security, I believe, started with President Franklin D. Roosevelt. And it was designed to, right after the Depression, at the tail end of the Great Depression, to protect the American seniors that they don't retire in poverty, basically. So over the years, there's been more hands into this pot. That's one mistake. And the way it's evolved is that no one really projected what the effect of the baby boomer generation will be on Social Security. So over time, the fallacy, the myth is that, well, Social Security is going to be my sole source of retirement, which is really not the case. It was designed to be just one part of retirement, not your sole source of retirement. And this is really what caught the Americans off guard, if you will, that they said, oops, apparently there's not enough for me to retire.
Right, and we're going to have to continue to watch all of this unfold here, but is there anything else that you'd like to share before we let you go here? Maybe you've already offered some tips, some advice for young Americans, but is there anything else that you would like to add that you think we might have missed in this conversation?
Just a few items. Stay informed, talk to your local legislator, get help from a financial professional that specializes in income planning, understand Social Security, because if you're unmarried, just to choose when to start Social Security could be pretty complicated. So be informed, get help, and put a lot of money away early.
All right, David Kanani, thank you so much for joining us here this morning. Happy Saturday to you.
Same to you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. All right, it is a new hour here on Live now for Fox, about 9:30 on the East Coast, 6:30 on the West Coast. Much more news to get to. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Super good, should it? The wild ones. Super fresh. That's on mom. She's some fresh.
Hello, this is Dr. Paul Cottrell, and we are live on YouTube and simulcasting on X Spaces. Thank you for joining. It is August 16th, and we're going to be talking primarily about the fallout from the Trump-Putin summit. I thought that Trump looked weak at the end. He looked strong at the beginning of the summit, but at the end, when they went up in front of the press and didn't take any questions and didn't come out with any sort of potential ceasefire, I think Trump looked very weak. I've been looking at some of the news this morning, and many of the commentators are saying the same thing. So let's dive in and take a look at this.
His goal. Trump wanted to put in.
So this is Times Radio. Trump subjected to public humiliation at Putin Alaska summit. So the way even they're phrasing it is, that it shows that Trump did look weak. But before we do that, please help support the work that I do. Make sure you subscribe to all the channels that I have. I have 4 channels on YouTube. I have Brighteon, Bitchute, and Rumble. All the links are in the description of this video and all my videos. You can also donate on Stripe, PayPal, or buy me a coffee on my website, the-studio-reykjavik.com, or you could be a paid member to my Patreon channel. Link is in the description of this video. I do all these videos for free. I also tell you how to play the market so you can make some money, and I tell you how to improve your health and wellness. With that, please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get ubiquinol. Ubiquinol is the most bioavailable form of CoQ10 that you can get. Guess what? Most people that are taking CoQ10, you're probably taking the wrong type. You can't get anything better than what I have in my hand here, ubiquinol. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, get the ubiquinol, take it every day, and what this is going to do is it's going to be able to absorb those free radicals, so you're bringing down the stress in the cell and in your tissues. You're also improving the mitochondrial health. Your ATP is going to go up, and ubiquinol helps to protect neurons. Super important. If you're turning age 40, you need to start to protect your neurons. Not just that, in your social network, you're going to know friends, family, coworkers. You're going to know people within the next 5 years that have early onset of dementia. There's multiple reasons why this is happening. I have already mentioned it, but it's going to happen. If you don't protect your neurons, you're increasing your chances of early onset of dementia. So you better pay attention. All right, let's continue with Times Radio.
The eye, and he achieved the goal. He also wanted to have a ceasefire, and it was a failure. And Ukraine, in all this negotiation, got nothing.
Joining me on the line from Kyiv is one of Ukraine's most prominent politicians, Kira Rudik, from the Liberal opposition slate Holos. Kira, thanks so much for joining me this morning. What is the view in Ukraine generally amongst the people, but also amongst the politicians, about this this kind of summit non-event?
Hello, and thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure.
Look, what was the goal of all the parties? Putin wanted to escape sanctions, and he achieved his goal. Trump wanted to look Putin in the eye, and he achieved the goal. He also wanted to have a ceasefire, and it was a failure. And Ukraine, in all this negotiation, got nothing as of right now. This is why the situation on the ground is very skeptical, especially given the red carpet greeting that Russian dictator was getting from President of the United States. You know, when I was watching those videos, I was just thinking about all the friends and loved ones whom Putin and his forces killed over the last 3.5 years. And it was indeed very painful. Because right now, even if you don't care about Ukraine, you need to understand that all the other dictators in the world are watching this, and they understand that they can launch a full-scale invasion, go ahead, commit all kinds of the war crimes, and then if the situation is right, they will be invited to shake hands with the American president and go on to the mutual press conference where they will say that they hope that the European partners and Ukraine will not stand on the way of peace.
Yeah, I mean, the really horrible thing was that as Vladimir Putin was being given that red carpet treatment with Sergei Lavrov in his USSR sweatshirt, that as that was happening at that very moment, Russia stepped up its bombardment of Ukraine and more people were dying. That surely was a message from Putin to the world, to Trump, and to Ukraine, wasn't it?
It was, and in fact, it is not the first time when he is acting this way. I want to remind you that after the last call that President Trump had with Putin on July 4th, Putin launched the most massive attack on Kyiv, killing dozens of people and destroying here again so many buildings. And this was a public humiliation of American president, and it was a part of the strategy, and Russians don't even intend to hide it, right? Same as they were never shy about saying they want to rebuild Soviet Union. And one of the ways of showing it that they mean business was Sergei Lavrov showing up in the hoodie. Again, these are the people who were acknowledged by the International Criminal Court as criminals. And the United States is a very rare country where they can actually travel without the threat of being arrested.
Yeah, but I wonder as well, viewed from Ukraine, whether you think the rest of the West is doing enough, and what sort of security guarantees do you think Ukraine needs from, for example, Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron, and indeed the Germans and other countries in Europe, in order to protect yourselves from future Russian attacks, should anything come about that looks remotely like a ceasefire?
So Coalition of the Willing, so-called, actually did a very good thing by calling President Trump before this meeting, where we think there was a shift in the perception that President Trump can make any deal about Ukraine without Ukraine.
Yeah.
And we are grateful to the partners who were very firm on the statement saying, look, this is exactly what you cannot do. And this is why President Zelensky is traveling to Washington, D.C. and will be meeting with President Trump on Monday. So this is the good thing. About the security guarantees, I think there is evolution of understanding that Ukraine needs to be armed to the teeth, so we will be able to protect ourselves rather than having like international courts here or having some military alliances. Because at the end, we know that politicians change. There are different political situations in all the countries, and we cannot rely on the position of any future president or prime minister. So for us, the best security guarantee would be to be a strong country ourselves. And this is totally achievable, and we think that this will be the best and perhaps the safest way for everyone to move forward. However, there are other options, and we are ready to discuss them. President Trump already said that Ukraine is not going to join NATO or not going to receive like security guarantees from NATO, but it could be some mix and match.
Yeah.
And again, whatever will make sure that Putin would not attack us again, whatever is workable.
So actually, you're kind of ruling out what has been suggested, which is that British, French, German troops might be on the ground in Ukraine in some way, even if they're not actually on the front line.
Well, the question remains again the following. If you bring in the international troops here, what will happen if, God forbid, Russian missile or Russian drone will kill an international soldier? And we'll know that that would happen because Russia is, this is something they're very good at provocations of this level. And so then we will get into even worse situation. And I think you need to be sure what will happen if this incident will arise before you're sending the troops here. And in fact, we never have asked for the international troops. We are always asking for more weapons and supplies so we can defend ourselves.
Yes, indeed. You know, I mean, Vladimir Zelensky has his own problems domestically and has been under some fire domestically as well. You are the leader of an opposition party in Ukraine. What's your opinion on the job he's doing right now?
So look, before the full-scale invasion, I was very vocal about what President Zelensky could have done differently. But since the war has started, we are trying to work as a team because we cannot have elections, we cannot replace him right now, and making sure that he has and criticizing him and decreasing his rating is not doing anybody any good. However, he has made some mistakes, especially in the attack of the anti-corruption organs with his party. Fortunately, we were able to reverse this back, but we just hope that he learns this lesson and will not be repeating such attempts in the future.
And what advice would you give him when he sets off to Washington on Monday to meet with Trump? What is the bottom line that he must demand from President Trump?
That in Ukraine,
Mike, if you had to choose, would you watch grass grow or keep track of your team's time?
Time tracking. With guys telling my team's hours, breaks, overtime, and time off.
that in Ukraine, we are same people that we were in 2022. People who declined and disagreed to capitulate. And we are not going to capitulate right now. Probably the worst thing that could happen is that this war goes on to our kids, to the next generation. We need to make sure that whatever is agreed is a stable peace that could go long for decades at least. And this is a very tough and complicated goal to achieve, especially that everybody's talking right now about how to stop Russia. But if the deal is unfair, it will be impossible to sell here in Ukraine. We have about 1 million people in the army. We have the majority of the families who have somebody serving. and Ukraine is democracy. And we have shown with the recent events when people were unhappy with President Zelensky that it's not that he can come in and say whatever he likes or whatever has been agreed and everybody will accept that. People here have their own voice, have their own vision, and have paid an ultimate price to be where we are right now. So it needs to be a fair deal for Ukraine.
Kira, thanks. And while you're still there, a couple of messages have come in from our listeners. Catherine says, I'd like to register my immense admiration for Kira, who is such a brilliant ambassador for her country, a wonderful communicator and tireless in her work. And Amanda says, just give Ukraine the money and let Ukraine win. So you do have support out there, Kira.
Oh, thank you. You are too kind.
It's not just the money. They're running out of bodies. So Ukraine is going to fall if there's not support. But the thing is should the United States be funding it? Or should the Europeans be funding it? Secondly, Putin's economy is starting to falter. So we're seeing almost like a equilibrium now where both parties are exhausted. So maybe wherever the territories are at right now should be frozen and that's it. Maybe that's the solution. But a never-ending war, that's financed by the American taxpayer dollars, I'm not so sure that's a good idea. If the Europeans want to deal with this problem, fine. Maybe that's what should happen. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Get the zeolite. Zeolite will detoxify your body. How does it work? It's going to bind to heavy metals, toxins, and chemicals and allow you to urinate it out within 6 to 8 hours. By detoxifying your body every day through using 3 small drops underneath your tongue and drinking filtered water, you're helping your body reach homeostasis, helping your immune system, helping your endocrine system. Your organs will start to perform better. Detoxifying your body is really important, but it's also important to make sure you drink filtered water, stay away from processed foods, get plenty of sleep, eat properly, and make sure that you clean your environment that you're in. Stay away from these chemicals that you may be having in your cupboard or in your closet or in your basement or garage. These chemicals you're breathing in small amounts every day that affect your system. So make sure you clean your environment. If you need cleaning solutions or paints or whatever in your house, make sure they're in a double layer container and get zeolite. Take it every day. Another great product that I have are the structural nano silver soaps. I have it in lavender, in peppermint, in lemongrass, and charcoal tea tree. Get a few bars for your household. Very high quality structural nano silver soaps. Help support the work that I do and help support your health and wellness.
What will happen is we're going to have excess space.
Growing your agency means helping your.
That we're going to probably be able to monetize and sell. We recently did a transaction.
Putin wanted to escape sanctions and he achieved his.
What I want to see is obviously Britain, the British government, be leading. We hear loads of rhetoric around coalition of the willing, and quite frankly, I think this government is quite tiresome on foreign affairs when it does statements and platitudes and all the rest of it. You got to have action. Trump's an action type president. He'll want to see action from us.
The shadow foreign secretary, Dame Priti Patel, has been unrelenting in her demands to give Ukraine more help, both political help and indeed military help. She joins me now in the studio. Thanks so much for coming in, Priti. Are we doing enough at the moment, and how do you react to what's apparently not happened at the summit?
Let's start with the latter point in terms of what happened or what went on in Alaska. So I think, look, they've obviously met. Jared is absolutely right. This was much more about Putin getting out of the international chiller and back onto the red carpet and the international stage. However, I think we're going to have to look at this now as a process. This is going to be piece by piece, step by step. And President Zelensky going to the White House on Monday is equally as important as the meeting that took place yesterday. The reality right now, which comes back to your point number one about where Europe sits and Britain's role, etc., is that Britain has been vocal. I personally feel we should have been stronger and more vocal. I was part of a government that clearly was there at the outset, convened Europe and, Jeff countries and all the countries on the eastern flank, because our security and their security is at stake here right now. Russia is a very significant military power in Europe that threatens us. It also threatens America. We have to be doing much more right now. One thing I would say...
What should we be doing?
So a couple of things, first of all. I think we should do much more on the military side. My party and I have been consistent on that. So yes, in terms of the equipment, the drones, the support, but there is a sort of elephant in the room here, which is on sanctions. I think we could be much more aggressive around secondary sanctions. We've been calling for that. We also feel that we've got to be smarter and work much more collaboratively actually with the Europeans in releasing a lot of the money that's been tied up from Russian sanctions to actually fund Zelensky and Ukraine's machine against Russia.
Which was a demand made on this programme by a Ukrainian opposition politician only an hour ago.
And they've been consistent in that. We met with them for many, many months, in fact, recent years as well, to do more on that front. But there is something else, and I think Europe has had some influence, and Britain in that quarter as well, in terms of making it quite clear to President Trump that Ukraine has to be at the table around any future discussions around Ukraine. There can be no territorial secession whatsoever. And clearly we need a lasting and a just peace. This could be the process towards that. But what I want to see is obviously Britain, the British government, be leading. We hear loads of rhetoric around coalition of the willing. And, quite frankly, I think this government is quite tiresome on foreign affairs when it does statements and platitudes and all the rest of it. You're going to have action. Trump's an action type president. He'll want to see action from us. The other point to make about what we've seen in Alaska, I personally think that's a bit of another calling card to Europe, which is step up, because we've heard the Americans consistently say they don't want to be funding this. They don't want to keep on being at the table. Europe is closer to Ukraine. Why don't you guys, so to speak, to use an Americanism, be much more forward-leaning? I actually think this weekend or yesterday's session was actually a big message to Europe to say, come on, be there. Don't just be at the table, but put your troops in if you want, or put your weaponry in there. Do much more. And I think
I was going to
has to be there.
I was going to come to that because you say that sanctions are the elephant in the room. Well, there's another elephant in the room, a room full of elephants. Troops on the ground. Donald Trump did, in fact, say, if there are going to be any troops on the ground, you better look to Europe for that. Would you be approving of the security guarantees to Ukraine, which put British troops on the ground in Ukraine?
That's what it's about. I think we're going to head into one of those discussions at some stage, right? This is about security guarantees.
Yeah.
Because it's our security that's at stake here, as well as Ukraine's. So I think number one, look, we're not there yet. We're clearly not there. So it's about all the measures and all the steps that would take place before we even get to that stage and we get to that level. And Britain has to be.
But would you rule it out?
I don't think we can rule anything out right now. We've just had, we've just seen a discussion that was behind closed doors and only photos that came out of Alaska. We don't know the context and the details. I don't think the British government has much idea right now at this stage as well, which is to my point. That's why Britain has to come back and show leadership. Where are we going with all of this? If President Trump gets to the stage, let's say post his meeting with Zelensky, and of course will there be a trilateral? We don't know yet. Putin doesn't even recognize Zelensky as, the democratically elected leader in Ukraine. So there's a lot here that we need to unpack. At some stage, could that come? And if so, what would security guarantees look like? Britain has to be a voice at the table when it comes to the future security. What do security guarantees look like? Is it much more in terms of weaponry? Is it more money? Is it going to be training more troops to then go in and be up the eastern flank or in Ukraine? We don't know. But these are the areas that the British government really needs to be thinking about, discussing, and quite frankly, I would argue, leading some of our European colleagues in those discussions as well.
Well, except that comparatively, in terms of, it's a comparatively easy decision to make to fund Ukraine better, to send more military equipment to Ukraine. The Rubicon, in a way, is whether actually European troops at all get involved in protecting the Ukraine and what that might mean if the Russians did attack after a
It's
ceasefire.
also a question, Rod, of what would it look like? So, I personally think as a country, we've left the EU for us.
The Ukrainians are running out of troops. That's a fact. All right. So sending materiel isn't going to help them that much. It will help a little bit, but it's only kicking the can down the road. Both sides are exhausted. So the only way where this is going to come to an end through military force is if NATO or individual European countries come in and actually put boots on the ground in Ukraine and actually do an offensive to push Russia out of the regions that they have gained in Ukraine. That's the only way this is going to be solved through a kinetic means. Now, if it's going to be solved through diplomatic means, Ukraine is going to have to come to the realization that a lot of the territory that Russia has taken will be going to Russia.
Yeah.
Despite, we've successfully left the EU, and yet Britain led, after Russia's illegal invasion, it was Britain that stepped up and convened European countries and others. I believe we still have a role to play in doing that, and that could mean shaping things going forward. I don't think it's as binary as you suggest around just funding and giving equipment, because if it was so straightforward, surely we would have been doing much more of that by now. And even that has been subject to negotiations and discussions over what kind of equipment goes in and who does it. I think fundamentally the real challenge right now is, number one, speaking with one voice and actually Britain showing strong leadership and convening around all of this. And number two, even on sanctions, being coordinated. We're not coordinated. Europe isn't coordinated. Other allies are not coordinated. The whole narrative around secondary sanctions is not coordinated. This is a big moment to put more pressure on Putin, and I would argue that's what Britain should be doing.
Isn't it fair to say, though, that both Sir Keir Starmer and David Lammy, who I've never been a huge fan of, have actually handled this stuff quite well?
Well, we could argue that. We could argue that, but I think at the end of the day, it's all about results. We're still on the treadmill of going round and round. And one could argue, you've heard Ukrainian politicians on your programme. I've been meeting with them for months and months. They've been calling for much more, certainly over the last 12 months, and that hasn't come together. We've had various convening meetings. Convening is the easy thing to do, if I may say so, Rod, in terms of foreign ministers and all the rest of it. You can talk to each other as much as you want, but the substance has to be the action that then comes forward, and that's what we're still waiting for. I would argue we've successfully done that. We should be back there leading a lot of that. We've got a lot of skin in the game. We're heavily invested in Ukraine. I would argue Europe is as well. America's put a lot of money in this. That's why President Trump is convening and doing what he did in Alaska, because it costs them money. He cares. We want to see an end to the killing, but how are we going to achieve it? And I think this is a new pathway that Trump has now said. We can't just keep on going back to the old narratives. Britain can step in and have a good leadership role here.
A couple of other questions on different issues. You will have read about the State Department's assessment that Britain its human rights have regressed over the last year as a consequence of presumably Sir Keir Starmer's government, and that freedom of speech is under threat. Got a point, have they?
I think there is a big point here. There's no question about that. We hear the terms, two-tier justice and all of this, right down to policing. This is effectively now becoming a live reality. Policing people's thoughts, speech, etc. That's hurting us. That really it's hurting our international reputation. There's a report out there in the US State Department. That's not good for us internationally. And what I would say, you mentioned David Lammy and how they've handled. How he's looked at Ukraine. But actually, this hurts us because it's about Britain's place in the world. It's about global Britain, our reputation. And do not forget, we've always been a country that's been open when it comes to free speech, fighting for values of freedom of belief and all those key things. and also standing up to autocracy in the world as well. So I think, we should be back out there. I'm very vocal about this in my current role and capacity. There is so much more that we can do, should do, and we shouldn't just be hiding behind, dare I say, the lefty lawyers, the human rights brigade, which I'm afraid has defined this government thus far.
And finally, and just briefly, your party is languishing in the polls. I think I forget what it was the last time I looked, about 18%, 16, 18%. Are you not tempted to join Reform?
No.
Why not?
We lost the election last year. It's going to take a long time. I call it the hard 9 yards, basically, in terms of, climbing Mount Everest. Some days there's more oxygen than other days. We have to re-establish our credentials and credibility with the British public, who felt very let down and disillusioned by us. And to do that, we have to be the genuine advocates of conservative values and beliefs. This isn't about joining other political parties that are not conservative.
They're doing very well.
They might be, but they're not they're not conservative in their instincts, their values, their beliefs, and where they're going. We are, and we believe in fighting for those values in the same way, Rod. That's why we're so vocal about Ukraine, standing up to autocracy, not kowtowing to those countries around the world that are our adversaries, which is exactly what Labour's doing with China right now. We have to fight for our values and beliefs in the same way in which we did in a very successful way in the 1980s. I think, when you look at the geopolitical situation right now, it's no different to the period before the Cold War ended. 45 to 89, the end of the Berlin Wall, we all thought was a great triumph. I'm old enough to remember all of that, but I do remember what it was like prior to that time all over again. It was conservative values and beliefs, actually with the United States as well, that fought for those freedoms and the battle.
We're going to go to MSNBC and get their take on the fallout from the summit. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the nattokinase. Nattokinase is fibrinolytic. It's going to break up clots. It also helps your lipid profile, super important for your cardiovascular health. And olive leaf extract, dual purpose. It brings down inflammation and helps with your lipid profile. By bringing down inflammation, you're reducing the chances of building up plaque. Also, bringing down inflammation helps with the immune system. So stack the olive leaf extract and the nattokinase. That's a great stack. Use discount 5, you get $5 off any order. If you spend $100 or more, you get a free gift until supplies last.
Imagine being able to build anything just by thinking about it. Meet Base 44, a complete AI creation platform.
New this morning, after being shut out of Friday's big summit in Alaska, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announced a short time ago that he will be coming to the United States on Monday to meet with President Trump. Zelensky had a one-on-one call with Trump and then with European leaders as Trump was traveling home from Alaska. Trump also spoke with NATO leaders, according to his press secretary. Zelensky wrote on social media that, quote, Ukraine reaffirms its readiness to work with maximum effort to achieve peace, adding, we support President Trump's proposal for a trilateral meeting between Ukraine, the USA, and Russia. While President Trump wrote on his own social media just a short time ago that a peace agreement, not a ceasefire, is the best way to end the war. It comes after Trump's summit Friday with Russian President Vladimir Putin, ending with no announcement of a ceasefire in Ukraine. During brief remarks after his meeting with Putin, Trump admitted he didn't get much from Friday's sit-down.
I believe we had a very productive meeting. There were many, many points that we agreed on, most of them, I would say, a couple of big ones that we haven't quite gotten there, but we've made some headway. So there's no deal until there's a deal.
As for President Putin, he got a literal red carpet welcome from the American president for his first visit to the U.S. in a decade, and a tummy smiling ride with no aides present and the president's armored limousine known as the Beast, and no sign of the serious consequences President Trump warned of before the meeting. NBC News White House correspondent Vaughn Hilliard joins us now. Vaughn, good morning. First and foremost, as you've been talking to folks in the White House, how are they feeling about this? Because the pictures of some of them as they were walking into the room where the remarks happened, they didn't look so as excited as Vladimir Putin did.
No, I messaged one official particular after the press conference that the two men held, in which President Trump spoke for just over 3 minutes, and I asked for insight and reaction, and it was, quote, "Not yet." That's not typically the response that comes after events of this magnitude, and I think it's notable because of the lack of specifics that folks outside of President Trump, Secretary Marco Rubio, and Steve Witkoff, who sat in that room for 3 hours with Vladimir Putin, have about this the substance of the conversation between the two sides. For more than 3 hours, they were back and forth. And President Trump, upon leaving Alaska last night in an interview on Fox with Sean Hannity, he was asked about the specifics. Of course, there was conversations potentially about the swapping of territorial land. That's what President Trump had previewed. But the president did not give any indications and did not go into specifics. And he said maybe somebody would. Perhaps that would be Vladimir Putin himself. And that is where we saw the European allies, as well as Volodymyr Zelensky, wait with bated breath for that phone call from the president, which he did execute on in the midnight hour upon his return from Alaska. And that's where Zelensky said that in his one-on-one hour phone call with President Trump, he said that he felt positive about the direction of it and was hopeful that there would be a trilateral conversation, meaning one that took place, a meeting between Putin, Trump, and Zelensky. And in the statement, I think it's important worth noting, he said, quote, "In my conversation with President Trump, I said that sanctions must be strengthened if there is no trilateral meeting or if Russia evades an honest end to the war. Sanctions are an effective tool. Security must be reliably and long-term guaranteed with the participation of both Europe and the United States." And so it begs the question here for President Trump this weekend before Zelensky comes into town. Exactly what did he indicate to President Putin that he would take to President Zelensky as a potential peace deal? Because it was initially set up that this meeting would be a demand for a ceasefire. That did not take place. And instead, you heard President Trump say from that podium yesterday that President Putin wants to end the killings as much as he does. It's worth noting that more than 70,000 Ukrainians have been killed, soldiers and civilians, at the hands of Russians in this 3.5-year war led by President Putin. Guys.
NBC's Vaughn Hilliard from the White House. Thank you so much. Let's bring in Richard Haas, President Emeritus of the Council on Foreign Relations. He's the author of the weekly newsletter Home and Away. And Celeste Wallander, who is responsible for Europe, NATO, Russia, and Ukraine as Assistant Secretary of Defense in the Biden administration. She is also Executive Director of Penn Washington. Folks, thank you for joining us this morning. I want to start with a statement right in from President Zelensky, brand new. We probably don't even have a full screen for this yet, where he says the positions are clear. We must achieve a real and lasting peace, not just another pause between Russian invasions. The killings must stop as soon as possible. The fire must cease both on the battlefield and in the skies, as well as against our port infrastructure. All Ukrainian prisoners of war and civilians must be freed, and the children abducted by Russia must be returned. Thousands of our people are still held in captivity, and all of them must come home. Richard, that seems like an outline for what he wants in some kind of deal as we move forward and kind of try to figure out, as these, this just happened really hours ago, how the rest of the world is taking all this in.
My reaction to that is that it's unrealistic. It's useful to distinguish between ceasefire or cessation of hostilities on one hand, peace on the other. Peace is asking an awful lot of both sides, and they're not ready for it. Peace means you agree to give up certain claims. You'd give up this on territory.
Man, yeah.
Whatever, population movements. Neither side is even in that zip code. A ceasefire, a cessation of hostilities may not sound ambitious. Trust me, it's ambitious after 3.5 years of the freeze of the war. And I actually think that's one of the mistakes of U.S. diplomacy. By introducing certain issues that would be part of peace talks, what in the Middle East we call final status issues, it's too much. It overloads the circuits. What you want is as simple and as clean as a ceasefire. It may not sound like much. Trust me, it's a lot. It doesn't ask anyone to give up their long-term goals. You maybe have a separation of forces. It doesn't prevent, by the way, a restart to the war. It's one of the reasons that in all of this, and it hasn't been talked about a lot, what has to be decided by Donald Trump is what is long-term U.S. policy towards Ukraine. What kind of support are we going to give? What kind of help for them, pressure on the Russians? This doesn't take place, shall we say, in a vacuum. Diplomacy always takes place in a context.
Celeste, help me square
this circle here. I'm going to play what President Trump had to say to Sean Hannity on Fox. This is after the meeting with President Putin. Watch this.
No, I'd rather not. No, I'd rather not. I guess somebody's gonna go public with it, they'll figure it out, but no, I don't wanna do that, I wanna see if we can get it done. You know, it's not a done deal at all. But it's up to President Zelensky, I think we are, and if they'd like, I'll be at that next meeting, they're gonna set up a meeting between President Zelensky and President Putin. And myself, I guess, you know, I didn't ask you about it, not that I wanna be there, but I wanna make sure it gets done.
Okay, I wanted to play that, Celeste, because President Trump is putting all of the pressure on President Zelensky here. He is the one, it's up to him. Now, let me read you this from this man by the name of Miroshnik, who serves as the Russian Foreign Ministry's ambassador at large for the Kyiv regime's work on it. Says here, as a leader of Ukraine, as he calls himself, Zelensky is unacceptable. He cannot sign anything. So how is a ceasefire or even a peace deal going to be possible when the Russians do not view President Zelensky as legitimate? And the president of the United States is saying it is up to the guy the Russians say is illegitimate to come up with a deal.
Well, thanks so much for setting that up so well. And I think you've done a great job of showing how difficult and complicated the situation is, as Richard also laid out extremely well. From the beginning, the stakes for Putin are not controlling territory in Ukraine. Controlling territory is instrumental to controlling the political leadership in Kyiv, having influence over Ukraine's foreign policy, security, and economy. And that is why they are talking about the illegitimacy of Zelensky. Because one of the demands that Russia has made for peace settlement is to be able to hold new elections with Russian influence, of course, in those elections, so that Putin's desired leader, the one he can work with to control Ukraine, is actually the president of Ukraine. So as Richard noted, there is so much distance between an acceptable peace settlement that at most what you could achieve is a ceasefire. And the reason you did not see any progress on a ceasefire in the discussions in Alaska is that Putin doesn't want a ceasefire because Putin believes that he is winning on the ground. That is the reason for these strategic attacks on Ukrainian critical infrastructure, on cities, on civilians, as well as on the front lines of the battle. So Ukraine is ready for a ceasefire. Zelensky has said he's ready for a comprehensive or even partial ceasefire. But Putin's trying to change the game by talking about a final settlement that he knows is a long way off. He's buying time, and meanwhile, he gained legitimacy and he broke out of the isolation that the international community had put on him 11 years ago, the first time that Russia invaded Ukraine.
Richard, you know, the thing that I think is striking us and also all the people around the world who are waking up to all of this news and trying to figure out what happened here is that Putin just a few years ago, just yesterday, 2 days ago, was a pariah, right? Most European leaders had not spoken to him in a very long time since he invaded Ukraine. But this NBC article that we have up today with this breaking news, Putin rehabilitated a reception in Alaska, and that's according to a German lawmaker. The quote is, "There is no ceasefire and there are no serious consequences," Roderick Kaiswider of the center-right CDU party told the German broadcaster ARD today. Instead, Kaiswider said the summit allowed Presidents Putin and Trump to appear on the world stage as equals, and said Putin's red carpet reception of Putin was in blatant contradiction to the reception given to Zelensky at the White House. I assume that's Trump's red carpet reception of Putin there. You know, he got a ride in the beast, which doesn't happen that often. He got this flyover, you know, all these beautiful pictures, Donald Trump smiling and shaking his hand. He got to talk first during the remarks and last. What did the United States get out of this?
Well, to take a step back, the idea of having a summit with Vladimir Putin, given everything you've talked about, it should have been made conditional.
Yeah.
To me, one of the most surprising things of Alaska was how unconditional the entire thing was. You're right, Putin not just was, but is a pariah.
Yeah.
The attacks continue, the war crimes continue.
While they were meeting, it appears.
Absolutely. So to give him an unconditional reception seems to me wrong. This all should have been wired, which is my larger point.
Yeah.
The idea that the American officials seem surprised and disappointed. I worked for several presidents. I worked for 4 years at the White House for George Bush the father. The idea that a president would go to a summit only to be surprised, these ought to be the most wired interactions, or almost nothing left uncertain.
A lot of the conversations that happened beforehand, the president just putting a bow on it.
Exactly. 99% of it ought to be wired. Not a guarantee, but wired. This seems to me to have been just the opposite. And I don't know if Putin misled the United States, if the envoy, Steve Witkoff, simply got played. I don't know if Donald Trump simply was so cocky that he thought the power of his personality could bring Putin around. But the idea that you would have had Putin come, essentially get literally and figuratively the red carpet, and have virtually nothing result from it. And then the president leaves saying, so now it's up to Zelensky. It just seems to be something is wrong here with how this was handled diplomatically, how this was handled. The foreign policy craft, if you will, of this seems sorely lacking.
Some of those put together in like 7 days. Usually they take months and months.
So can we just talk about the Allies' response? And we've heard lots of negative comments. Eugene read some from German officials. I'm going to put up this statement from UK Prime Minister Starmer on the meeting. It says President Trump's efforts have brought us closer than ever before to ending Russia's illegal war in Ukraine. His leadership in pursuit of an end to the killing should be.
Under these lights, curiosity is sparked. That's why we build up.
Of an end to the killing should be commended. While progress has been made, the next step must be further talks involving President Zelensky. The path to peace in Ukraine cannot be decided without him. We've already talked about the role of Zelensky, but I'm just wondering why. Can we talk about using Prime Minister Starmer's statement there and sort of the praise at the top of President Trump? How are European leaders viewing what President Trump did yesterday?
So Europeans, I think, are breathing a sigh of relief. They don't, they're not happy that there were the optics that there was a breakout from isolation of Putin, but they were working in a very, very clear, coordinated way to prevent significant damage from the meeting. That is the reason why they met with Zelensky ahead of time, why they coordinated discussions with President Trump ahead of time, and now they managed to get a conversation afterwards. Think of the Europeans right now as our major disaster management and prevention team working with Zelensky to prevent the United States from taking really bad steps. And the Europeans are doing a very good job of that since earlier this year. They did it at the NATO summit in The Hague. They laid the groundwork for making sure that President Trump got some of the outcomes that he was aiming for. And I think they're playing a very constructive role in keeping the White House within certain parameters in order to ensure that we don't have a complete break between President Trump and President Zelensky, and Putin is not left standing there alone influencing President Trump, because that is what Putin has been aiming at. So you're seeing sort of a team approach to diplomacy, where Europe is actually helping to keep the United States, maybe not on the straight and narrow, but at least a little more straight and a little more narrow than otherwise would be the case.
Please go to my store, ella-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the digestive enzyme complex. This will help to break up carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids and reduce the load on your pancreas. Super important if you're age 40 or older. This stack that I'm going to show you is really important for brain function, to help the efficacy of vitamin D3 and boost up your immune system. Magnesium and zinc will boost up that immune system and help with brain function. Vitamin C will help with your skin, but also vitamin C with magnesium will boost up that immune system and help with brain function. So a great stack would be to take the magnesium and zinc and the vitamin C and magnesium with the digestive enzyme complex. You're helping your pancreatic health. You're digesting your foods easier. you're helping with your skin, helping with the efficacy of vitamin D3, and you're helping with brain function and immune system. So super important. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Take a look at the supplements, get the stacks that I'm telling you to, or if you just want to take the supplements separately, that's up to you. But use discount 5, you get $5 off any order. If you spend $100 or more, you get a free gift until supplies last. Also, get the probiotic. Probiotics are really important as a foundational piece to build off of. This probiotic is a powder. You mix it with soft foods like hummus or yogurt. You can mix it with just filtered water, but take it every day. Super important. And what that will do is it'll help you to digest your foods. It'll help with your immune system. It will help with your metabolism. It'll help with your brain function. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the probiotics.
The quickest way from a billion points of data to a point of view. That's why.
Again, Mr. President, I'd like to thank you very much, and we'll speak to you very soon and probably see you again very soon. Thank you very much, Vladimir.
Next time in Moscow.
Oh, that's an interesting one. I don't know. I'll get a little heat on that one, but I can see it possibly happening. Thank you very much, Vladimir. And thank you all. Thank you.
That's it for the historic face-to-face meeting between Presidents Trump and Putin. There was no deal on Ukraine, either a big one to end the conflict or a temporary ceasefire to halt it for a bit. But the atmosphere between the two men seemed really quite jolly. So what can we take away from this meeting, which seems like a bit of an anticlimax? We will discuss the implications on this episode of the BBC's daily news podcast, Newscast, where I'll also be joined by some of the BBC's other top podcasters. Hello, it's Adam in studio.
It's Victoria in the studio.
It's Vitaly in Anchorage.
And it's Sarah, right beside Vitaly here in Anchorage, Alaska.
Right, let's kick off this mega co-production of Newscast, Ukrainecast, and Americast. All the casts, and it is 11 minutes past 6 in the UK, where me and Victoria are. Sarah, what's the time? I've lost track of the time difference now.
It's just past 9 o'clock on Friday evening, so it's not just a different time, it's a different day for us, Adam.
Okay, right, just to add to the confusion. So we had the chronology of Putin arriving, and we'll talk about that and the symbolism of that, because that was like a very visual story with a lot of kind of geopolitical implications. Then we had the meeting between the two delegations. That ended up being slightly different from how we had expected it to be. And then just a little while ago, we had this news conference between the two principals, as you call them, Trump and Putin. Although, Sarah, to call it a news conference is a bit of an exaggeration, isn't it?
Well, because that suggests that the journalists who were in the room would get a chance to ask questions. That's a traditional form of a press conference. Whereas what happened was we got statements from both of the leaders, and then they scurried off the stage before we had a chance to ask them anything. So maybe we should call it a joint statement rather than a news conference.
And Vic, think about it. The number of times we've watched Donald Trump, the number of times he just turned up to a podium, said some words, and then gone without then answering questions for an hour or 2 hours. Or whatever. So it's unusual, isn't it?
Has it happened since he's come back into the White House for a second time? I can't think of an occasion. He normally loves those press conferences. He talks and talks and talks. He will take as many questions as the assembled members of the press want to throw at him. It was extraordinary, and presumably that's what President Putin wanted. No questions from reporters, and that's what he got. And Vitaly and Sarah, in terms of what we learned, for people who are just tuning in and trying to find out what happened at this summit, is there anything to tell our listeners around the world?
No deal, no ceasefire. Well, bottom line is things stand as they did yesterday, which is kind of what Vladimir Putin wanted. I think he's going home happy. Donald Trump wanted a ceasefire. That didn't happen. For Ukraine, well, the worst case scenario seems to have been avoided, a scenario in which Donald Trump would have offered Russia Ukrainian territory in exchange for a promise of a ceasefire or a peace deal. That didn't happen either, but uncertainty prevails.
Yeah, no deal and no ceasefire, Vitaly. The bizarre thing is there also seems to be no hard feelings about that. I would have thought that Donald Trump would be very disappointed, even possibly angry about leaving this summit empty-handed. We can talk about this at greater length, but he seems to be reasonably happy. Certainly that's his outward countenance. So we should delve into how on earth that can be.
So you know what? Let's dive into just what happened at that news conference or those press statements. Let's play you a nice chunky clip of what Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, had to say. And this is him speaking through an interpreter because he spoke in Russian for most of it.
And he spoke first as well.
Yes.
The situation in Ukraine has to do with fundamental threats to our security. Moreover, we always considered the Ukrainian nation, and I've said it multiple times, a brotherly nation, however strange it may sound in these conditions. We have the same roots, and everything that's happening is a tragedy for us and terrible wound. Therefore, the country is sincerely interested in putting an end to it. At the same time, we're convinced that in order to make the settlement lasting and long-term, we need to eliminate all the primary roots, the primary causes of that conflict. And we've said it multiple times, to consider all legitimate concerns of Russia and to reinstate a just balance of security in Europe and in the world on the whole.
And Vitaly, that phrase, primary causes, listeners of Ukraine Council know it well. The root causes, according to President Putin, must be eliminated. Just remind our listeners around the world what he believes, what Vladimir Putin believes those root causes are.
Well, that was the most important thing he said at that news conference, I thought, or in that statement. Root causes, translated from Kremlin speak, means the original reasons why he started his special military operation against Ukraine. And those reasons are focused on destroying Ukraine as an independent nation. So what he was saying there is essentially, look, I'm still determined to keep on doing what I have been doing in Ukraine for 3.5 years, and you're not going to be able to stop me.
My interpretation of him saying the root causes is the expansion of NATO since the fall of the Berlin Wall, and how America, the United States, misused its monopolar power, hegemonic power in the world once the Soviet Union collapsed. Now, if we can get Russia into the economic relationship of the Western powers, especially the United States, and convince them to help us in a two-front war with China, then it would potentially give Putin a negotiating tool or a means to go, okay, some of the land that Putin took from Ukraine, he would give back, but some of it he would not. But with the war with China, there's a lot of Northern Front territory that really is in contention between China and Russia. And there's resources there. And in terms of land mass, I think it's actually larger than this 20% region that Russia wants from Ukraine. So if they look with the long strategic game here for Russia, it will be actually beneficial to end the war in Ukraine, be more in line with the Western powers, help to build up their economy, be aligned with the United States, and weaken China. But that's my take. But I think a major reason what's happening with the war in Ukraine, a major part of it is the expansionism of NATO. And that we have in the national security state this perma-bear, anti-Russia mentality within the State Department, within the Defense Department, in the intelligentsia of warfare gurus, you know, coming from the East Coast of the United States. Now, if we spend so much of our energy and money in Europe, we won't be able to focus so much on maritime preparedness and readiness when China makes their move on Taiwan. And so this is much more complicated than just a Ukraine-Zelensky war. Now, Zelensky and Ukraine actually aren't that important. What is important is the effects of the war and how it may cause us to drag our feet and not be fully prepared for a war in the Pacific. Ukraine is just not that important. But unfortunately, because of the way the national security state is, it's so focused on Russia so bad. Everything's Russia's bad. Everything's Russia's bad. Meanwhile, we could use Russia as a major ally to take out China. China is the bigger problem. Russia's economy is just a fraction. I mean, I don't know. Russia's like, I'd have to look it up again, but I think Russia's economy is only $2 trillion or something. Maybe it's less than that. I think it's less than a trillion. But the point here is that we have states that have a larger GDP than Russia. Russia doesn't have the economic prowess as the United States. It's not, so it's better to bring them into the fold and help and be allied with the United States, and to have multiple fronts on China. If they're in the fold with the United States, guess what? The Chinese aren't getting to get cheap black market oil. If they're in the fold with the United States, guess what? The Indians are going the Indians are going to have to buy oil on the open market. The Indians will now start to go, well, we need to be more aligned with the United States, because maybe China isn't going to be, you know, a rising power anymore. So if we can de-escalate what's going on, it's far better for us for a war in the Pacific, because that's where the game really is. It's not Ukraine. Ukraine isn't that important. It's important maybe to the Europeans, but for the United States, that's not where the game is. It's the Pacific. That's where the game is. So if the Europeans really think that this is just, you know, that Russia is just in this never-ending expansion, even though NATO was showing aggressive behavior, let's put it that way, then let the Europeans deal with it. It's the Europeans. If they want to spend blood and treasure for some sort of major offensive to try to push back the Russians and take back the regions, go at it. But the United States needs to focus on the Pacific, not Eastern Europe. Now, unfortunately, I don't think we have negotiators on our team more forceful in trying to bring Russia into the fold. I mean, it should be something as simple as Putin. You're going to give up most of the land that you took, but you're going to gain a lot more in economic benefit. And not only that, we're going to work together to take out China. That should be on the table. It shouldn't be like, well, you know, be quiet about that. No, we should we should be aggressive against China and more willing to bring Russia into the fold. But if Putin keeps on not taking the off ramp, then there's going to be a larger war in Europe. Now, will the United States be the ones that are the catalyst for it? Probably not. But Germany might be. UK might be. Maybe even France. But the thing is that Putin's not taking an off ramp. And the United States thinks, I think because of the Trump administration, they'll be that even though it's hard, but just through relationships, you'll be able to wind this down and get a ceasefire and lasting peace. And I think we need to be more aggressive and say, you know what, you get this, you get this region, you give back this region, but you get this economic benefit, and guess what? We're working together to take out China. You know, but we don't think that way, and unfortunately, we're probably going to see this. Probably is not going to be solved in the Trump administration. Now, if Putin's not taking the off ramp with Trump, and you probably will not have as a willing president to bring Russia into the fold. Once Trump gets off the scene after 2028, and if Putin is still around, then we're probably going to devolve in a much more intense conflict in Europe. I feel as though we're like at a crossroads. You know, I wish that Putin would take the off ramp, but he's not taking the off ramp. All right, he feels as though he has more strategic cards to play, or a better position than Zelensky has, and maybe even the president has. So he's not taking the off ramp. But there's not going to be a president after Trump that's going to be as willing to try to negotiate peace in that region. And so as Putin starts to age and this war continues to grind out and their economy starts to falter, that will cause other variables where he may just retreat, or he may increase his efforts, and there's going to be more of a conflict between Europe and Russia. Now, historically, when Russia is the underdog, they usually win. But if this keeps on grinding out and their economy starts to falter, Russia's economy starts to falter, there may be enough economic prowess in Europe to be able to actually overthrow the Putin government. But this probably would be very bloody to do. So we're at a crossroads of World War III. Maybe we're already in World War III. You know, some people say we're Cold War 2.0. Maybe it's hot war already. I don't know. But Putin not taking the off ramp is scary. But part of the problem is that the neocons with the NATO was part of the reason why Putin is in power. Part of the reason why Putin did the advancement. Now, some people would say, well, if NATO wasn't expansion, wasn't pushing for an expansion, Putin would have gained territory even earlier. We never know. We don't know, because that's counterfactual. We won't know that ever. But the thing is that it does seem to me that there's not going to be a president on the scene, United States president on the scene, that's going to try to actually de-escalate this war as much as Trump is. But I personally think that Trump failed in the summit. Trump looked weak. after they came out of the negotiations and they went up on stage, they didn't take any questions. He looked weak, and I don't see any means of a ceasefire anytime soon. So it's either the United States is going to tell Zelensky, here's a bunch of money, good luck, with the war, and NATO forces or individual countries start to pile in and start to provide materiel and maybe even troops, because I think Ukraine has problems with troop levels, and maybe they're going to try an offensive. But when that does happen, you're talking about supersonic missiles use by the Russians. Putin's going to be starting to sail Raber with tactical nukes again, and blah blah blah. I think many people are at fault here. The neocons are at fault for decades, but Putin not taking the fucking off ramp is also at fault here. Now we're at a crossroad. The United States needs to focus on the Pacific, because if China wins the Pacific island chains, there's going to be, one, the loss of hegemonic power for maritime navigation. There's going to be the steady decline of the American empire. You're going to have countries around the world and states, because of the ultra liberals within the United States. You're going to have countries and pockets within the United States that are going to be pushing for a one-party political system that's very similar to China. China cannot win. It cannot win. They must lose. We must win. And so that's the bigger issue here. It's not really Ukraine. Ukraine isn't the issue, but what it's a quagmire for the United States, preventing us from spending our time and our preparation for maritime warfare with China. So the neocons fucked stuff up. In the end, the whole strategy against Russia and to try to take down and to take its resources and turn it into a true democracy, that strategy will literally end the United States empire, because we didn't focus on where the ball really is. We focused on another part of the field, and that is Ukraine. Ukraine is not the action. It's Asia. Asia is where it's at.
So I suppose that's important, because it means, A, Donald Trump has been subjected to the inevitable history lecture about all of those root causes. That may have an effect on his psychology and his viewpoint of the conflict. And also, Donald Trump has just sat there listening to Vladimir Putin making that case to the entire world. Lots of people in America will be tuning into the news tonight, where you are, and tomorrow morning, hearing Putin making that case, a case that we maybe don't hear very often.
Yeah. And it was clear that Donald Trump had listened to that.
Putin's case that he mentioned on Tucker Carlson, I don't know, a year ago, maybe it was 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, somewhere in there. He went in a long diatribe about the history and the people of Ukraine going back and forth and blah, blah, blah. That part I don't really care about. I really don't care about that part. What's more important is what happened after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the mismanagement of the neocons with a monopolar United States empire. That's what caused Putin. That's what created Putin, was the mismanagement from the neocons.
The length during the meetings that they'd had behind closed doors. And then they came out to give these statements, and Donald Trump really happily ceded the floor to Vladimir Putin to go first. That's very, very unusual. Donald Trump likes to go first because he likes to emphasize that he's the most important man on the stage, but he happily gifted the floor to Vladimir Putin and listened to him.
Maybe diplomatic protocol is the hosting nation, the president speaks first, and then the guest speaks second. But I think what Trump was doing was basically this. He wants to talk last. He doesn't want to talk first because he didn't know what Putin may say. So he wanted to be able to respectfully end the conversation. So if he let Putin talk first, Trump was more in control of the podium. That's why he did that. But he went against protocol. Well, who made up the protocol? And sometimes rules are meant to be broken.
Talking about these root causes of the conflict. We know we've had this conversation before because sometimes when Donald Trump comes off the phone with Putin, he sounds really sympathetic towards this idea that there was good reason why Vladimir Putin had to invade Ukraine because he felt that there was a security threat on his borders. He does seem, when he has just heard these lectures from Putin, to become quite sympathetic to that point of view. And of course, that's the fear, isn't it, of European nations and particularly of President Zelensky, that every time Donald Trump is in a room with Vladimir Putin, he becomes more sympathetic to Putin's case. Now, what they didn't do was discuss land swaps or territorial deals and end up, actually giving away any of Ukraine. But nonetheless, you could sort of see in the body language in the room that Donald Trump had been persuaded once again, for now anyway, of Putin's case on this. So when President Trump said in that statement, so they had a 3-hour meeting, then there was a 12-minute period where they read out those statements to the press. President Trump said there were many, many points that we agreed on. Do we have any idea what they agreed on? No.
They keep outperforming me and call me crazy, but I hope they never stop. Everyone thinks I have a team, a full-on 5-person operation, but it's just me and Notion. I didn't hire anyone, I hired AI, a team of diligent experts. My executive assistant handles all my calendars and emails. My marketing associate drafts my posts and runs my campaigns. And my sales rep finds leads and actually follows up without me having to lift a finger. Clients ask me,
no. And then he also said that there was one very significant thing that they did not agree on. And he didn't tell us what that was either. And as soon as he had given his statement, Donald Trump headed into an interview with Fox News, where he sat down and the presenter there asked him once again, what is this significant point of disagreement that you couldn't reach an agreement over? And he wouldn't tell him either. And I don't think it's as simple as just, we didn't get a ceasefire. I think it's probably the reason why they weren't able to agree on a ceasefire, but precisely what it is that's holding this up, we don't know. But it was a very bizarre thing that Donald Trump then went on and said in that Fox News interview. He said, it's now up to President Zelensky to sort this out and to take this forward so that we can achieve the ceasefire. He didn't say what it is that Vladimir Zelensky is supposed to do to move this forward. But once again, we got that sense that Putin has very effectively made his case and said, the ball's in Zelensky's court, not mine. Get him to do something so that we can agree a ceasefire. Don't put it all on me. That was the idea that came out of the way Donald Trump was saying it's Zelensky now that needs to.
Oh, so Sarah, just before the summit, the sort of the new lowered expectations version of what the summit was going to produce was a whole host of kind of like mini deals on maybe things like restoring flights between the US and Russia, which had stopped, or joint deals on minerals either in Alaska or in Russia or Ukraine. Did any of that happen at all?
There's no indication that they talked about that. We thought that they might raise nuclear weapons, that Putin might tempt Donald Trump with the idea that they could sign some kind of nuclear deal, and that would gild his reputation that he wants to build as a global peacemaker if they were reducing the number of nuclear weapons in the world. But there was no mention of any of that, so we don't know if it was discussed or not. But we were just left with this bizarre sense that Donald Trump, even though he had lowered expectations, as they said that this is not going to produce a peace deal in Ukraine, this meeting. He said really specifically on the way here, on Air Force One, he spoke to reporters and said that he wanted to achieve a ceasefire today, and if he didn't get that, he would not be happy. He said, I don't know if it's possible today, but that's what I want. I won't be happy if we don't get it. He really clearly didn't get it. And he didn't look unhappy. He was sort of, he was gazing rather benignly on Vladimir Putin as he was talking at this joint statement. And at the end of it all, Donald Trump said, I'm sure we're going to speak again very soon. We might even meet again very soon. And then Vladimir Putin.
This is why it seems as though Trump always chickens out. This is the whole taco trade. Trump always chickens out. He chickened out on the tariffs, and he looks like he's chickening out on the actual peace agreement with, or at least a ceasefire agreement with Putin and Ukraine. Trump isn't as good of a negotiator as he thinks he is. There's the big problem. Now, it's a big issue that he didn't cause. It's really mismanagement by the neocons since the fall of the Berlin Wall. And they created an individual because they thought they knew better. They created Putin. They thought they would be able to contain him, and eventually he would wither away. But it just got stronger and stronger because of their stance with NATO. The neocons created Putin. Not as a puppet. That's not what I mean. They created him because of their actions, and that created the environment that let Putin rise and become the leader of Russia. And it's tapping into, a greater Russia. They're declining. They're declining economically. They're not growing. They're declining. So he's tapping into that he will be their savior. Putin will be their savior. All right. But he's also a corrupt individual and makes a lot of money on some of these economic deals. Now, because of the sanctions, he's hurting. His oligarchs are hurting. And so there's pressure within Russia to solve this problem, is to get back onto the world stage as a honest broker, quote, honest broker. But if he's not taking that off ramp, Russia's not going to get integrated into the world. So Trump didn't do very well with this summit at all. I personally think Trump looked very weak on it, and I'm a supporter of Trump, but I think he managed this completely wrong. I think he came away with nothing, and Putin has notched up a little bit on the world stage. It's like just Trump's chicking out. Trump is more bark than bite. Take, for example, because you have a lot of people out there that are, that are pro-Trump, pro-Bannon, right, types, and and all this, right, pro-MAGA. Trump could have assassinated, decapitated the Ayatollah and end the regime in Iran. He didn't do it. He could have, but he didn't. So Trump chickened out. Trump chickens out with the tariffs. He's always kicking the can down the road. Just recently, he extended the deadline for China because he chickened out, because he's afraid it's going to hurt the bond market. It's going to hurt the equity market. He's afraid that it's causing problems potentially causing problems with inflation. Some of the PPI data is showing that inflation's starting to come up. It's not really getting into the CPI data yet, but it might be lagging, and it may take a few months to actually see it in the CPI data. But in the PPI data, it's starting to look like it. Just starting. Trump chickened out. So what did he do? He has a summit, says that he's going to be mad if there's no ceasefire, and he's all chummy with Putin. I'd like to see a ceasefire. I'd like to see less war in the world. But the thing is, Trump chickened out again. Now, I'm a supporter of Trump. I voted for him 3 times. I think he's one of the best presidents that we've had in modern history. I think that he can do a lot. There's something about the way the stars that he was born under, he's a lucky person. All right. He's not an intellectual for sure. He's not an intellectual. I'd be shocked if he read a full book in the last 20 years. All right. He's not an intellectual, but he has street smarts. And sometimes that's even better than being an intellectual. But the point here is this. He says one thing, it starts to cause a problem. He thinks he knows better, and the system is convulsing, and then he steps back. So it's the taco trade. So the traders are right. Trump says one thing, do the opposite, and you'll make money. You know why? Because Trump always chickens out. He chickened out on the tariffs, and he's chickening out with this whole ceasefire. He can't do it. Same thing happened with North Korea back in his first administration. No deal. You know, it was a lot of rhetoric about Rocket Man. No deal. He walks away, and we don't hear anything after, because it was a total failure summit with North Korea. Now, fast forward to where we're at right now. North Korea has more military technology for missile development and the nuclear program. Once again, Trump chickened out. Big problem. Big problem. Now, like I've been saying for a long time, where the action is for our generation and for the stability of the American way of life is in the Pacific, not in Europe. We must prevent the expansionism of China on the first island chains. If we don't stop that, there's going to be a loss of hegemonic power by the United States. And your way of life in the United States will start to decline. Now, people would say it's already declining. Not so much. You know why? Because we can issue a lot of debt. But once we can't issue that debt for various reasons, either because we can't afford it, because we default on it, or other countries aren't willing to buy it. But once we stop with issuing debt and we have a buyer on the other side, once that stops, your way of life will crash 100%. America is living on debt. All of this technology that we have, all of the standard the standard way of life that the United States has had is all predicated on people buying our debt. Once people stop buying our debt, it crashes. We won't have the standard of living that we're accustomed to. Now, if you listen to what Niall Ferguson is saying, that when you start looking at debt to defense spending, when you start looking at debt to GDP ratios, we're in a dangerous zone here. And we're not even in a world war, a real world war, like, World War II. So we're spending all of this money and we're not even in a real war yet. Just imagine when the real war happens and how much debt that will have to be issued. Most people don't even know this. America has never paid its debt that it issued during World War II. It's been rolled over from one bond issuance to another. We have never paid the debt. How do you think that we get to $36 trillion? A lot of people don't know this. A lot of people don't realize this. Oh, America, you drive around, everyone has a big car and a fancy house and blah, blah, blah. Well, not everybody, but a lot of people. But it's all predicated at the very upper level debt issuance. It's debt. It's not through capital savings. It's debt. And so we want to get in a quagmire with Ukraine. We're already $350 billion in this bullshit. And the real war hasn't even started yet in the Pacific. Because the real war there is going to cost trillions. The Middle East costs us 2 to 3 to 4 trillion, depending on how you want to slice the data. That was a 20-year never-ending war. And that was with a bunch of people that lived in a cave. That literally in Afghanistan were literally living in the Stone Age. So we're fighting people that lived in the Stone Age for $4 trillion. Now, how much do you think it's going to cost for a maritime war in the Pacific against China? You really think that America can absorb that debt load? It can't. It can't. So when if we lose the Pacific, then you're going to have people in the United States and nations in Europe and in other regions of the world, they're going to be wanting a one-party government that's very similar to the Communist Party that's in China. You don't believe me? Look at what was happening in the United States during the Great Depression. You think everybody was all apple pie and, the American flag? Socialism was creeping in. There were lots of people that were starting to listen and paying attention to Lenin and Marxism. And the same bullshit's going to happen if we lose the Pacific.
Cheeky reply.
Next time in Moscow, he said that in English. I thought Donald Trump looked positively charmed, enchanted by Vladimir Putin. And to me, the sign of things to come was when they met on the tarmac before their meeting. Vladimir Putin was all smiles. He was doing his best to look pleased to see his friend Donald Trump again. It looked like they made jokes to each other. They nearly hugged, they shook hands, and then something really bizarre happened. So Vladimir Putin's limousine, the Aurus, of which Russia is really, really proud, because it's Russian-made, was there on the tarmac. But Vladimir Putin got into the car with Donald Trump, Donald Trump's the Beast. And that, I think, was a carefully calculated and prepared ploy. It's a charm offensive. If you want to make your, whoever you're negotiating with, you want to make them trust you, believe you, like you. This is what you do. That was him signaling to Donald Trump, look, I trust you, I like your car, let's travel together. And I thought at that moment, oh, I see where this is going, and I think that trick worked.
You don't climb into the Beast, of course, as the US president's limousine is known, without being invited. And for all that Putin did turn up clearly ready to charm him, Donald Trump looked ready to beach up. That's right. For Vladimir Putin. Putin was walking towards him, he was standing clapping his hands, sort of applauding him for arriving and looking absolutely delighted to see him, charmed, as you say. And it was fascinating that they got in the car together so they could have a conversation one-on-one. Because we've been told that it had been planned that they would have a formal one-on-one meeting once they got to the military base and they sat down together, just the two of them and their translators. But that plan got changed by someone. And there never was a point of this one-on-one tete-a-tete, except for in the limo. And by the time they were sitting down for formal talks, there was a team of at least 3 on the American side and on the Russian side. So it was an opportunity, wasn't it, for them to do some business without their foreign affairs advisors listening in.
Do you have any idea where that change of format happened? Is that like the wiser people on Trump's team trying to hold him back so that he doesn't have that private moment where you can give stuff away? Do you think that's a product of the lobbying by the Europeans? Was one of their messages privately to Trump, don't get in a room with him by yourself? Or was it Trump himself thinking, actually, I don't want to be stuck in that room on my own with this guy, but because he didn't even trust himself?
Fascinating question, isn't it? I mean, if I was advising the White House, I wouldn't.
Imagine being able to build an app with your name on it just by thinking about it. Meet Base 44, a complete AI creation platform.
if I was advising the White House, I wouldn't let Donald Trump get in a room on his own with Vladimir Putin, and I would try and insist that he had senior advisors there. But how you tell that to Donald Trump, I'm not entirely sure. The people he ended up with it were Steve Witkoff, who is the special envoy to Russia, who's been going back and forward and meeting with Vladimir Putin in Moscow and then relaying messages back to Trump, and the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. And that's very interesting because Rubio is much more hawkish on Russia than Donald Trump is. He has been much more critical of Vladimir Putin in the past, much more critical of the war in Ukraine. And he wants to get tougher with Russia than Donald Trump's instincts would be. So to put him in that room may have constrained Donald Trump to a certain extent, although of course by the time they emerged from that room, it wasn't entirely clear how constrained the president had been.
I don't know. You know, they're focusing on stupid shit like, you know, who's in the room and if he's in the beast or not. That's not the fucking prop. That's not the big point here. The land in Ukraine, in terms of long-term strategic vision for Russia, it would be better to convince Putin, give up most of the territory that you have and work with the United States to knock out China. And you can get the land that's in contention in the north, the northern front, for that's in that Russian-China region. There are resources there that are going to be very important for the new economy. That's where the action is. That's the long-term vision. So the United States should basically say, we're going to tell NATO that Ukraine will never go into fucking NATO. And by the way, Ukraine, you're going to have defensive weapons, but not be given offensive capability. And that Ukraine should be a buffer zone between NATO and Russia. Now, Russia needs to relinquish most of the land that they gained in this war. Not all of it, but most of it. But the idea is that work with the United States for a better land grab in the north of China. But the problem is that that's not where the population density is for Russia. You got to remember, Russia's a big country. There are more polar bears than there are human beings in Russia. I'm trying to make a point. Obviously, I'm speaking in hyperbole. All right? But it's a large country. They don't have a big population, human population. So the population density isn't on that side of the region. And that's the reason why Russia is more focused on the western side of the country and not so much on the borders of China. But if they really focused on where the more important land is, it's not Ukraine. It's the northern front above China.
First Trump presidency, when people speak of adults in the room, meaning advisors who knew Russia, who knew Ukraine, who could advise Donald Trump on how to deal with Russia. You don't get to hear that phrase that often anymore.
And there weren't that many people in this delegation who were Russia experts of any kind at all. Donald Trump brought with him his Treasury Secretary, his Commerce Secretary, the Defense Secretary turned up. But these aren't people who've got a long background in foreign affairs, let alone in Russian matters. But then, Vitaly,
so let me get this straight. Let me get this straight. The BBC newscaster here is saying that, well, President Trump's envoy, President Trump's advisors, they're not experienced enough. How did we get to this point, Miss BBC? We had a bunch of fucking neocons for decades after the fall of fucking Berlin Wall pushing NATO eastward. Those were from experts. We wouldn't have been in this problem if we had less experts in the room. God.
with them. These people have been dealing with the West for a long time.
They know exactly what they were doing. So together with Putin in that room with Donald Trump, there was Sergei Lavrov, the longtime foreign minister of Russia, and Yuri Ushakov, President Putin's longtime foreign policy advisor. I mean, you'd struggle to find people who are more experienced in Russia in dealing with the United States.
The way you are describing this, it sounds like it's been incredibly successful for President Putin. He's back on the international stage with the leader of the most powerful nation in the world. Russia hasn't signed up to a ceasefire, let alone aid.
Absolutely. Putin gained everything during this summit, and Trump fell flat on his face. I'm a Trump supporter, all right? But he fucked up. He fucked up.
Details of any agreement, and there was no mention from Donald Trump of any severe consequences because Russia hasn't signed up to a ceasefire. I mean, it's 10 out of 10 for Moscow, isn't it?
I think there's very little doubt as to who the winners and losers are in this situation. But Vladimir Putin, he's back in from the cold. He got to meet the president of the most powerful country on earth, and Vladimir Putin's state ideology is based on this siege mentality, us versus them being the West, and America is the epitome of the West for Russia. It's the main enemy, if you like. So for him, this is about being seen as an equal, respected, feared maybe, and he got it.
But Donald Trump doesn't seem to see that he has lost anything within this. And this is what is so puzzling to try and work out. In that interview with Fox News he did straight after the joint statements, he was asked to mark the interview and he gave it 10 out of 10 as well. So he thinks that somehow he is winning. You have to wonder, he's on Air Force One now and flying back to Washington, whether he's reflecting on what he really got out of this and whether he won anything at all. This is the man who thinks he is the world's greatest deal maker, who can do a deal with anyone and always come out on top. But what has he walked away with here? It is very, very bizarre. Whereas he has given all this status to Vladimir Putin, he even said afterwards, he said, we are the number one and the number two countries in the world. Now, I don't think whether you're talking about defense, economy, whatever, anybody ranks Russia as number two. China, by any measure, is that. But there he is. He's even inflating Russia and Vladimir Putin's place on the world stage to flatter him at the point at which he's walked out of these talks with none of you showed for it at all.
And in terms of Ukraine,
here at Five Guys, we don't have any freezers, so you can be sure that your burgers it's fresh and.
And in terms of Ukraine and President Zelensky, Vitaly, what might be going through the minds of Mr. Zelensky and the people around him?
Well, standing here in Anchorage, I can almost hear sighs of relief from Volodymyr Zelensky's office. The worst thing that could have happened, i.e. being presented with a deal, which would be handing territory over to Russia, that seems to have been avoided. But the big question now is, what next? What do we do? Donald, I mean, what do you want to do? Because in the past week or so, Donald Trump criticized Volodymyr Zelensky, suggesting that, well, I think Donald Trump wants Volodymyr Zelensky to do exactly that, offer some territory to Russia in exchange for a deal. Clearly, this is not something that Volodymyr Zelensky will accept. Clearly, this is not something that the public in Ukraine will accept if you look at the most recent opinion polls. So it's a tricky.
The United States can help Russia and Ukraine at the same time by doing economic deals where they help to rebuild their country. In addition, the United States can work with the World Bank and the IMF to help rebuild the war-torn parts of Ukraine. So the deal with Zelensky is give up some land, and you'll have economic ties to our economy. Now, with Russia, okay, some of the land that you obtained through the war, you're going to have to give up and get back to Ukraine. But you're going to be in the fold economically with the United States, and you'll be able to have a vibrant economy. Russia doesn't have a very robust economy. I mean, it's not, I mean, it has nuclear weapons. That's about it. All right. And they know how to, they know how to survive war for centuries. But that's it. They're not a real robust economy. Not like the United States. So when you do that and you're aligning Russia with the United States, you're breaking up BRICS. You're breaking up the BRICS. That's another aspect of maintaining the hegemonic power of the United States. You got to break up BRICS. So a great way to break it up, oh, guess what? Have Russia in the fold with the United States with a two-front war with China. And move India towards the Western Alliance. So everyone would benefit. The United States would benefit. It would hurt China. It would help Russia and its economy. And they would get land back that's in the northern front, with China. They get some land back from Ukraine, but they'll have to give up some land. Ukraine will have this rebuilding effort. So everyone wins. Everyone wins in this regard. The other path is more destruction and death. But the neocons, they don't care.
Zelensky, not least because of all the uncertainty and also Donald Trump's inability to get Vladimir Putin to stop attacking Ukraine.
Donald Trump left saying he's going to call some of the European leaders that he spoke to earlier this week about this. And he said he'd be speaking to NATO and others as well. So
I apologize for stopping them constantly, but thoughts come to my mind. I am concerned that because of the taco trade with Trump, always chickening out, Trump always chickens out. I'm not so sure that he will defend Taiwan. I'm not so sure that he will defend the first island chains. He has not shown anything in his presidency, this presidency or the previous presidency, where Trump will be there for the duration, not like a quick fix. See, using the B-2 bombers on a bunch of nuclear sites in Iran, that's a quick fix. The Israelis shot up the defense systems, not the United States. Who paved the way into Iran was Israel. Now, knocking out those nuclear facilities was important, but why didn't he go further and decapitate the Ayatollah? Because he chickened out. So you really think that he's going to go toe-to-toe with the PLA? No, he's not. He's not going to go toe-to-toe with China on Taiwan. And that kind of scares me, because if he's not talking strategically with Putin like this, then he's going to literally destroy the U.S. empire. But it's not going to be under his watch. It will be in a future president watch. Because he was always looking for the expedient solution, not the long-term benefit. How do you have long-term benefit and peace in the Middle East? And no one wants to talk about this. You got to destroy this idea of a two-state solution, and you have to destroy Iran. How do you have long-term peace solution in the Pacific? You have to make sure that China stops its aggressive behavior on the island chains, because it doesn't just affect Taiwan. It affects the Philippines. It affects Japan and South Korea. But will Trump really do the right thing? Because he hasn't done the right thing on the international stage, ever. He's only done a part. He's only gone 30% or 50%, knocking out a bunch of nuclear facilities after the hard work was done by knocking out the defense systems. That's only doing it half. That's half-ass. There was no reason to keep the Ayatollah alive. So this is the problem with our foreign policy. This is the problem with the use of our military. We're willing to bomb for multiple years a bunch of people that are living in caves, living like they're in the Stone Age. But if someone has a nuclear weapon, if someone has some military prowess, no. We're not gonna, we'll walk on eggshells. I want a president that actually gets the job done, not, lily-dallies around. Now he wants a Nobel Peace Prize. Great, everyone, we want peace, and if he can do it, great. But not where it's setting up the stage for years down the road after his presidency that we lose our hegemonic power in the Pacific. Because in the end, what did we, the United States, gain from that? Trump gained maybe a Nobel Peace Prize, but what do we gain from it? Because if we lose, then you're talking about a loss of the American way of life. And there will be factions within the United States and around the world that will be pushing a one-party government. But Trump, he got a Nobel Peace Prize. But he didn't get the job done. So when people say that he always chickens out, it's true. Throughout his whole fucking life, it's been like this. And I support him, all right? It's not that I'm an anti-Trumper. I'm not. But the thing is I want him to fucking do the job right.
He may even be phoning them from Air Force One as we speak. But after some of those conversations have taken place, we may learn a little bit more about what it is that Vladimir Putin says he needs before he can agree to a ceasefire, and what it is that Donald Trump thinks that Zelensky needs to do in order to move closer to that. If we can discover what the sticking points are, and therefore what Trump and Putin thought to get them over that, then maybe we will learn a little bit more about what the point of this is.
Yeah, I suppose the conclusion I'm coming to is that this is just another step. And it's sort of because it was a summit and because it was a historic moment and because there was lots of drama.
Now what it is Trump is used to reality TV, WWE, wrestling. He wanted it to be like some sort of, Gorbachev, Reagan-esque summit. And he fell flat on his face. Flat on his face. He failed. Trump failed. It's okay. It's okay. Because with failure, good leaders will learn from it and not make the same mistake again. Bad leaders keep on failing. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Help support the work that I do. All of this stuff I'm doing is for free. All right? But go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and pay attention to the protocol that I have to slow down the aging process and boost up your immune system. And oh, by the way, you're going to know a lot of people in the next 5 years that are going to have early onset of dementia. And that's going to start in your 40s. You know why? For a multitude of reasons. The problems that we have with the chemicals that are in our environment, the crazy crap that we went through in 2020, lifestyle issues. Those are the three major categories. And there are subcategories within that. But guarantee me, I guarantee you that people within the next 5 years, within your social network, within your family, within your work, you're going to start noticing people with early onset of dementia. So it behooves you to start protecting your neurons. So vitamin B complex helps. The first 4 B vitamins helps the mitochondria. Mitochondria is super important to produce ATP. So the first 4 B vitamins helps with the electron transport chain. That's going to increase your ATP. When you have more ATP in your cells, including your neurons, you're going to have those neurons and those cells perform better. Now, vitamin B complex helps with the cellular metabolism. Obviously, when you get older, your metabolism goes down. So a great way to reverse that is to rev up the metabolism at the cellular level. And vitamin B12 is super important for your nerves. You're going to notice a lot of people starting to have early onset of dementia and Parkinsonian issues. It's starting. Trust me, it's starting. Now, Goodnight Formula. Goodnight Formula has GABA, passion flower, melatonin, and tryptophan. What does that do? It's going to allow you to get into 3 to 5 cycles of REM sleep a night. That's going to help you to slow down the aging process, help with your immune system, help you to consolidate memory. If you get into these cycles of REM sleep on a regular basis, you're detoxifying your central nervous system. If you're chronically sleep deprived, you are not filtering out, you're not detoxifying your central nervous system. So garbage is going to start to collect, and voila, memory starts to fade. You start to think slower, and you start to have the early onset of dementia. It behooves you to really pay attention to what I have to say. Get the Goodnight Formula and make sure that you're in that 5 cycles of REM sleep a night. Now, omega-3. Omega-3 is super important to bring down systemic inflammation and to help with your cardiovascular health. Now, if you have bad cardiovascular issues, right, you're going to have poor blood flow to your brain. Now, if you have poor blood flow to your brain, do you think the microenvironment for your neurons are going to be healthy? Of course not. So poor blood flow will lead to cellular death, neurological death. That means early onset of dementia and motor coordination problems. So having a good, robust, healthy cardiovascular system is actually beneficial to your brain function. And with omega-3, you're reducing the chances of further plaque buildup because it's helping you to control your lipid profile. It helps to bring down LDL levels and it helps to increase your HDL levels. You know why that's important? Because less LDL that's oxidized means less plaque, less systemic inflammation, less neural death. You know why? Because if you reduce the inflammation at the cerebral level, the myelin sheaths of your neurons are healthier. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and don't be a BBC stupid reporter. Get an omega-3, get the Goodnight Formula, and get the vitamin B complex. Super important to improve your health and wellness. Use discount 5, you get $5 off any order. All right, let's continue on BBC because they're the intellectuals. You know what's really amazing is when you start listening to these talking heads and you start asking, like, where'd you go to school? What kind of work did you do? And almost all of them are just a bunch of people that push paper. They write articles, they have opinions, they never built anything, they're not engineers. None of them, or almost none of them. Very rarely will you find someone that was an engineer that is actually on a talk show of a major news network. Like, it almost never happens. So they're all a bunch of humanities, liberal arts majors that literally don't know how to build shit. They don't know how the real world works. But they'll tell you how the real world should be. But they literally don't know anything.
Making those slightly weird comments about land swaps, it felt like this was going to be a culmination of something. But yet again, it's just another step. And actually, you could argue it's not even a step forward because, as Vitaly said right at the start of this episode, actually nothing on the ground in Ukraine has changed. Nothing in the kind of big geopolitical forces that make up the conflict have changed either. And what really gets me is, and okay, Steve Rosenberg, our Moscow editor, will laugh when I say this, is I think I see Putin in a slightly different way. So, first of all, you see him on the red carpet, and you're like, oh, yeah, a couple of days ago, this guy was a total pariah. Now he's getting the red carpet treatment and the ride in the Beast. And okay, that's psychologically makes you as a human being perceive him differently, just on a sort of subconscious level. Then it was sort of seeing it almost like a kind of like impish Putin emerging. So the bit where they're doing the gaggle with all the journalists shouting questions at the delegations, which of course happens every time Trump appears in public. But for Putin, he was sort of like laughing. He does this funny little sort of like impish grin about like, oh, is this how crazy you guys here? Obviously, there's a subtext there about there being not proper freedom of the press in Russia. And then just at the end, that little bit where he says, next time in Moscow, it's like, oh, actually,
freedom of the press is super important in a democracy or a constitutional republic. I'm definitely for freedom of the press, but there is something called etiquette, and that etiquette by the press corps is starting to lack. They start to, one, demonize the ones that they are interviewing, but not only that, them screaming all over each other like a bunch of hyenas doesn't show professionalism. I would hope that the press corps actually is a little bit more professional in the way they conduct themselves. Instead of yelling over each other, there should be some discussion of who should ask the first question, the second question, the third question, maybe, you know, pick straws or whatever. But tone down the rhetoric. People are tired of watching CNN, them screaming over each other and not being able to hear any of the individuals speaking. The same thing with the press corps. There's a loss of etiquette. Back in FDR days, there was times where he would talk off the record and talk on the record. So what the president would do, the president would basically say, oh, you know, this is off the record. And that would mean that the press corps couldn't write anything down, and that it was a free talk, free discussion between the president and the individuals in the room. And that was the press corps. And so the president used it as an opportunity to get a feel for how they were thinking with a certain policy. And after that discussion, he would say, going forward with the discussion, it's on the record. So anything that was on the record was able to be in the news. Can you imagine doing that today because of the lack of efficacy or lack of ethics in the press corps? Of course not. You can't have a president saying this is on the record or off the record. Even when you say it's off the record, they're going to leak it. There's no ethics.
English really well. When do you ever hear Putin speaking in English and in a sort of like quite pally, matey way? And then you realize, oh yeah, that's what's happened here. Putin has now been rebranded, not as like supervillain of the world who invaded a sovereign country and led to like, tens of thousands of his own people's deaths. He's now he's now a player on the world stage who goes and joshes with Donald Trump. Ran over.
Sneakish, the word that comes to mind, Adam. You'll know what I mean by that.
Why isn't the BBC talking about how President Xi has concentration camps of the Uyghurs? I mean, what about all the atrocities that the United States are doing? No one's a little bit white. No country's a little bit white. See, it's always Putin bad, Trump bad, and the intelligentsia is always right. That's the impression I get with the BBC. Yes, yes, yes. We're the BBC, and we are always right because we are a bunch of liberals that have humanities degrees. Yes, but we don't know how to fix our toilet, nor a roof, or how to build a home, or a car.
That's just he's wormed his way into Donald Trump's good graces and played it very carefully. Now, you were talking about those opportunities when they were in front of the press and people were shouting questions loudly. It can't be very often that Vladimir Putin.
Okay, if there's one AI side builder you need to meet, this is dope tech from Wix. That is whole.
Vladimir didn't get. How big were they shouting?
Lost the audio.
He put his hand to his ear and sort of pretended that either he couldn't hear them or he couldn't understand them because the questions were being shouted in English. But yes, with a little sleeked smile on his face as he was doing it, as though it's a joke to come to America and have people yelling at you about murdering civilians in Ukraine. Now, you know, he was able to brush that off as terribly amusing. I mean, that tells you something about the mindset he arrived with, doesn't it?
And for non-Scottish colleagues,
let's not talk about how the CIA was trying to, you know, do operations in certain countries, right? Yeah, no, we don't do assassinations, do we? Yet it was recorded on tapes recorded by JFK. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Get the lignans. This will bring down inflammation, soak up free radicals, help with the endocrine system and the immune system. Ashwagandha root will help to control your cortisol levels and your blood glucose levels. If you have elevated chronic elevation of cortisol, it's immunosuppressive. You want to bring that down. That's the reason why ashwagandha is so important. If you have high blood glucose levels, that's bad. It causes inflammation at the vascular level, and that causes problems and further decline of tissues and inflammation and buildup of plaque. So you want to take the ashwagandha root, bring down those glucose levels, bring down that cortisol level. And turmeric. Turmeric is an antioxidant. It's going to soak up free radicals, super important. But better yet, turmeric helps with inflammation. It brings down pro-inflammatory cytokines. By stacking these together, the turmeric, the lignans, and the ashwagandha root, you actually have a very strong, very powerful stack that helps with your immune system and your cardiovascular system. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Now let's go back to the BBC, which is full of liberals and humanity majors that don't know how to make anything.
Sleek it. Do you know what sleek it means?
I absolutely don't. Sorry.
It's a great Scottish word. Appears in lots of Robert Burns poems, like "We sleek it good and timorous beastie." I've just double checked on the internet for the official definitions. It either means artful, flattering, or ingratiating, or having a glossy skin or surface.
Okay, well, it is the perfect word. I mean, the way he was sort of smirking as that question was shouted at him, you know, Vitaly.
I can't deal with it. They're focused on the minutia, and they didn't focus on the big stuff that I just mentioned. So we're gonna kick BBC off, and we're going to go to another video. Let's see what some other comments. Let's see here. I'm tired of listening to these. I'm just had enough. All right, let's listen to Lindsey Graham here.
We are broadcasting from Joint Base Elmendorf, Richardson. We are in Anchorage, Alaska. Joining us now with reaction to today's historic meeting are Senators Tom Cotton, Arkansas, Lindsey Graham, South Carolina. Lindsey, start with you. A couple of things really stand out to me. Vladimir Putin saying to the world, this war never would have happened had Donald Trump been president. Donald Trump, scale of 1 to 10, gives it a 10.
Yeah, I just Trump, this is another thing I can't stand about Trump, even though I voted for him. All right. But Trump needs to stop saying, this isn't the, if I was president, the war would have never started. It doesn't matter. You're president now. Fix it. Fix it. Fix it. Stop saying that it wouldn't have happened, because that's water under the bridge. Waste of time. You only have X amount of time in the presidency. That's it. You can't, that's it, right? So stop wasting time. So I can't even play Hannity because he upsets me. God.
I took a lot away from this interview. Your thoughts?
Number one, I don't really care I blame Putin more than anybody else for starting the war. I want to be clear about that. But let me tell you, I've never been more hopeful this war can end honorably and justly than I am right now. The news you made in this interview to me is earth-shattering. President Trump said that Putin wants him to meet with Zelensky. That Putin is now apparently agreeing to a trilateral meeting between Putin, Zelensky, and Trump. That's the biggest breakthrough of the night. I've never heard that before. If we have that meeting, I think there will be an honorable and just end to this war before Christmas, well before Christmas. If that meeting doesn't come about, then I think Trump's going to have to use severe consequences against Putin and those who buy his oil and gas.
So basically, if I'm reading in between the lines here, Lindsay's basically saying we're not going to be forceful against Russia if they don't want to play ball until next year. So basically what Putin just did was he gained another 5 months of reprieve, maybe 6 months of reprieve from sanctions, from further sanctions. Well, the Russians were on the ropes economically. See, this is another reason why Trump failed.
And what was your big takeaways of this?
Yes, Sean, I agree. That would be a very critical meeting between Presidents Trump, Putin, and Zelensky. There's no ceasefire coming out of this meeting today, but also I thought President Trump stood firm in defense of U.S. interests and also our friends in Europe and Ukraine. This is in contrast, for instance, to Joe Biden's summit with Vladimir Putin in the summer of 2021. In just 2 months, we saw the collapse of Kabul, and then 2 months after that, we saw Vladimir Putin begin to mass forces on Ukraine's border. So I think it was an inconclusive meeting, but an important step forward. And as Lindsay said, if that leads to direct negotiations between the presidents of Ukraine and Russia, I think we'd be in a position to have a durable and stable peace that protects Ukraine's territory, autonomy, and sovereignty, and allows it to build for its future.
Yeah. Oh, well, Senator Cotton, the president was kind of clear in the lead up to this meeting. He did not overpromise and underdeliver here. He did.
Remember the Russia hoax at the very beginning? Who was one of the people that wanted to make sure that they investigated Trump? Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham, because he's a permit bearer. He hates the Russians. And he was willing to buy into the bullshit lie that came from the Hillary camp, promulgated by the CIA and the FBI. So he's supposed to be an honest broker on this? He's just McCain and resurrected.
He said he was here to see if there was a path forward. Clearly, he believes that there is. Apparently, based on everything that I heard and read that Vladimir Putin said, I was in the room at the time. I don't understand or speak Russian, but having a readout of it, it seems like he feels that there is a path forward and wants President Trump to be a part of it. That was the stated purpose, was it not?
Yes, Sean, I think the president appropriately set measured expectations for the meeting. Vladimir Putin has been waging this war of aggression for 3.5 years now. I think the first step is going to be a ceasefire. We didn't have that today, but hopefully in the weeks ahead, especially.
Let me get this straight. He could have used a teleconference call that would have cost a lot less money. Now think about this. You have not necessarily Fox News, but you have liberal media that's complaining about climate change. All right. You had all of those reporters flying in from all over the world, long flights, spending lots of gas, jet fuel, lots of money to get into a room that they never were able to get their questions answered. You had a a group of chefs preparing food that wasn't eaten, and the preparation of the Joint Air Force Base for this summit. And you had to have vehicles shipped in, you had to have forward Secret Service agents combing the environment in Anchorage. Vehicles had to be shipped from Russia. Vehicles had to be shipped from the United States, the continental United States. For what? 3 hours of bullshit? And then fly Air Force One. How much do you think that cost? I'm willing to bet it's close to $10 million. $10 million for this fiasco. Now, was that money well spent for something that they knew wasn't going to? No, this was all show, pursuing peace. Look at this, pursuing peace. It wasn't like they knew that this wasn't going to end well. They knew it, but they were willing to spend our taxpayer dollars for a bunch of horse shit. $10 million or more to do this fiasco.
Presidents of Ukraine and Russia can sit down. There'll be a ceasefire, which can stop its killing at least temporarily, and then move on to that durable peace settlement. I think this was an important first step. Again, President Trump said he didn't expect to have any kind of major breakthrough today, but he did hope that it would set some groundwork for future talks, and it sounds like that's what happened.
Yeah, Senator Graham, what would you like to see as next step?
Well, he could have gone on a teleconference and done it for a hell of a lot cheaper.
I did bring up with the president, I said, in most people's minds, and you had made similar comments that there's going to be land swaps. There probably will be, I would assume, the Donbass region, which is about 80% Russian national, will remain with Russia. But what Ukraine is obviously going to want out of this more than anything else, they've got to have security guarantees, non-NATO related. And that would mean, obviously, a good relationship with the United States, their ability to purchase weapons. And of course, Europe is going to have to step up.
Yeah. Well, the infrastructure of deterrence is what Biden and Obama failed to deliver. When Putin invaded in 2014 and 2022, Obama and Biden's watch, there was no telling Putin, you better not do it again. I have all the confidence in the world that Donald Trump will make it clear to Putin, this war will never start again. If it does, you're going to pay a heavy price. Security guarantees for Ukraine. So,
really? When he has a history of always chickening out? Really? I don't think so, Lindsay. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the Myotrol. Myotrol helps with gene expression build muscle. And guess what? Since we're going into a war with China, better start building up that muscle. Start doing those calisthenics. Hey, kids out there, get prepared. Myotrol has flavonoids, polyphenols, and lignans to help with the gene expression to build muscle. Do resistance training and take the Myotrol. Super important if you're 40 years of age or older. Resveratrol, I've been taking for decades. Super important. It soaks up free radicals because it's an antioxidant. It helps with the health of the mitochondria, boosts up those energy levels. And resveratrol helps with youthful gene expression and gets rid of cells that are in senescence. As you age, you start to build up cells that are in senescence. And what does that mean? Those cells just collect garbage. They just sit there and collecting more garbage. You want to get your cells to go into apoptosis so you can repopulate those tissues that have adult stem cells. So when you do that, and there is a purging of those senescent cells in the tissues that can regenerate, on average, your telomere length within that tissue will actually be longer, because when a cell divides, the telomere length shrinks. it gets to a certain point and then it stops dividing or goes into apoptosis. So if it doesn't die off and it just sits there, it's in senescence. Well, you want to get rid of those, activate the repopulation through adult stem cells, and coming from an adult stem cell, the telomere length will be longer compared to those other cells within that tissue that have been dividing several times. So this is a means to actually create a local environment within the tissue that is actually younger through younger methylization profile and a longer telomere length, which is associated with a younger cell. So resveratrol is super important take for youthful gene expression. Clarity factor gets rid of that brain fog, allows you to consolidate memory, help with the support of memory, and you'll be thinking quicker. You'll be able to concentrate, and over time, you're going to build up those dendritic connections. Super important. So you have that positive neuroplasticity. You'll be thinking faster. You'll be sleeping better. You'll be able to concentrate. You'll be able to recall better. So it's super important to take every day, no matter what your age is. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. So if you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, I don't care. Take the clarity factor. Super important to take. And NAD+. NAD+ is a supplement that will boost up your NAD+ levels. NAD+ is important to bring up those energy levels. NAD+ also helps to repair DNA damage, and NAD+ helps to support and protect your neurons. So, like I said, taking NAD+ is very important. So a great stack, protect your neurons and help with your DNA by taking the NAD+ supplement. Clarity factor, help with concentrating and supporting your memory. Resveratrol, helping with useful gene expression. And myotrol helps with the gene expression to build muscle, especially when you start doing resistance training. So these are powerful stacks here. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get those supplements. Use discount 5. You get $5 off any order. If you purchase $100 or more, you will get a free gift until supplies last. Let's continue on with the earth-shattering news about the summit by Lindsey Graham.
In the future, he'll be fighting a coalition the world and just not Ukraine. That American weapons will flow to the Ukrainian military in perpetuity. They'll have the strongest army on the continent of Europe. That will have pre-invasion sanctions to hit Putin if he ever does this again. There will be land swaps. You can't evict every Russian, but the Ukrainians will make that deal, not the United States. Ukraine will make that deal. And Trump set in motion the end of this war. Now, I've never been more optimistic than I am right now. Tom is right. There's no ceasefire. But when Trump told you, and this is breaking news as far as I'm concerned, that Putin wants to meet with me and Zelensky, that sets in motion the end of the war. And let me tell you this, if he does meet with Putin, Zelensky, and Trump, and there's no end of this war, Trump will crush the Russian economy.
Well, I think that's what the president said, they'd be dire.
Until there's some sort of negative feedback loop in the world economy or in the United States economy, and then Trump will chicken out again. Trump always chickens out. You take any policy that is done in this administration, and you'll notice when he's talking, he's playing hardball, but when the system pushes back, he gives in. He chickens out.
Says, in fact, this meeting did not go well today. That's not happening. And he even went a little step further when he said he didn't think he had to go back to China in terms of their import of oil. Let's go back, Senator Cotton. Remember, Crimea was under Obama and Biden. And as Putin was amassing troops on the Ukrainian border in 2021, troops and military equipment, Joe Biden never picked up the phone, never called Vladimir Putin. Joe Biden, famously said, "Don't." That was echoed by Kamala Harris. And then, of course, well, what happens if? Well, it depends if it's a minor incursion. Donald Trump is involving himself pretty much in every conflict around the world. He explained that when he's talking about trade with these countries, he's also talking peace with these countries. There's really not the trade deals obviously impact the United States. Peace in the world just saves lives. And he seems heavily invested in it. And I don't think a lot of world leaders are willing to expend the political capital to do that.
No, I don't think so either, Sean. Strength and resolution matters tremendously in the conduct of foreign policy and national security. And you put it well. Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine when Barack Obama was president. He did it again when Joe Biden was president. He seems to do it when Democrats.
I watched it. I spent a lot of time on this summit, all right, and watched it all. And I'm telling you, my takeaway of this was that Trump failed the summit. And Fox News is putting a lipstick on a pig. That's what they're doing. He failed. There was no ceasefire. You really think that there's going to be an agreement by Zelensky to give up land? Absolutely not. If Russia is saying we're not giving up anything, do you think Zelensky will say, okay, we'll give up something? Of course not. The only way to reach homeostasis with this is that both parties lose something. Ukraine's going to have to lose some land, but Russia is going to have to relinquish some of their gains. And then there will be peace. And there needs to be an agreement that Ukraine doesn't get into NATO, period. Because that was the catalyst that created Putin, was this neocon, never-ending expansion of NATO. All right, let's go to Times Radio, talking about Trump blinked again in chaotic meeting with Putin.
Those who answer the call of the vagabond know. Best stories aren't about where you went. They're about how you got there.
I'm sorry to be too dramatic about this, but we are appeasing the bully of gifting.
Before we do that, let me just plug a couple products here. Please go to my store and get the collagen. Collagen is super important for your skin, your nails, your hair, helps with your musculature, helps with your joint health and your cartilage, and your bone density. Super important to take. It's a powder. Mix it with soft foods, filter water, a smoothie, or even with milk. But take it every day. Super important. And make sure you do some resistance training with it. Also, I have lozenges and drops. For going into the cold season, it's really important to take. If you get an irritation in your throat, take them right away to mitigate. Elderberry zinc is a 21 count, very high quality lozenges. And I also have drops that are smaller in 100 count. You get them in honey and lemon, cherry flavor, or in blueberry. Get a few bags for your household. Make sure you have some at work, at home. You never know when you need it, but mitigate it right away. You're going to start hearing people in the fall and in the winter having this razor throat issue. You got to mitigate it right away. Trust me on this. Go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the lozenges and the drops.
Fifth of Ukraine to a country after it's been invaded, and that is not a good place to be at all. We require America to stand with European allies, to look our enemy in the eyes and not blink. For the moment, that looks like exactly what we're doing.
Well, the Prime Minister and European leaders are rallying around Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky after yesterday's meeting between Presidents Trump and Putin. And that meeting ended up without a ceasefire deal, or indeed any deal. Keir Starmer, President Zelensky, and other European leaders spoke to Donald Trump on the phone while he was flying back to DC on Air Force One early this morning. And the leaders of the European Commission, France, Italy, Germany, UK, Finland, Poland, and other European Council leaders released a joint statement saying that the next step must now be further talks, including President Zelensky. And they are ready to work with President Trump and Zelensky towards a trilateral summit with European support. So what could that support look like? Joining us now is Tobias Ellwood, former Foreign and Defense Minister.
Oh, what? Why is it? Wait, hold on. Let me fix the audio here. Once in a while, the speaker will have an issue.
Your take, Tobias, of what we witnessed yesterday in Alaska. Someone has described it as
As in all fact, all pompous, all circumstance, but actually nothing really changed.
It's true.
I think that's a fair description. I mean, step back from
It's a waste
the
of money
itself. The difference between Trump 1.0 and Trump 2.0 is the team around him. Gone are the experienced diplomatic advisors who were able to speak their minds behind the scenes. Instead, he's got his surroundings.
I got to interject here. 2.1, I'm sorry, 2.0 Trump and 1.0 Trump. The big difference with his team is that you don't have a bunch of infiltrators compared to the previous administration. The previous administration, there were lots of infiltration within the cabinet to try to control him, right? Because they wanted to push this neocon perspective, right? And unfortunately, he made poor decisions on bringing people in the cabinet because he was inexperienced. Now, were these individuals more experienced in their fields? Yes, but they were still infiltrators. He won't bring that up. I mean, a big part of the reason why he wasn't able to do as much in his first term was because he had a cabinet that was slow walking everything. Now, I'd much rather have people that are less experienced in his cabinet, but aren't on the take, that aren't infiltrators for the national security state.
With largely political friends and supporters who lack the experience to put together a summit of this stature, where usually 90% of the details are choreographed well.
First of all, this was all ad hoc. This was rushed. Even someone that was experienced wasn't going to be able to do much better. Now, I think what Trump basically wanted was to create. It was more about show than actually substance. And I think that was the whole intent of this, was about more show than substance.
Advanced. I mean, this was chaotic. The agenda, even the people around the table, and what was going to be achieved. On one side, it's good. Two adversaries, nuclear powers, with huge differences, are meeting face to face in today's difficult and dangerous world. But clearly, Putin was enjoying the limelight. Welcome on that red carpet, invited out of global isolation, handshakes with the United States American president. He could have not asked for more. A day on the international stage and avoiding a deal with Ukraine, simply playing along, and even promising to host yet another summit in Moscow.
Unfortunately, the immature part of Trump, there's always that 12-year-old aspect to his personality. The immature part of Trump, I think, thought that he would be able to charm Putin to capitulate and move towards ceasefire.
Ended earlier than planned, I understand. They were supposed to go on for much longer. Trump claimed in, I think, a Fox interview that it was 10 out of 10. But he's being naive, I think, with Russian Foreign Minister turning up, Lavrov, with a T-shirt that said CCCP on it, USSR in English. It showed Putin was not taking this seriously. And if I may say, I worry that perhaps Trump is aware of all this and has for some time been looking for an off-ramp. He's not been able to provide that deal that's going to get him some form of Nobel Peace Prize. But he wants to be seen. We bring the stakeholders to the table, and if they don't agree a deal, he can then walk away and say, I'm going to have nothing further to do with this. I've done my bit, and go for a more transactional relationship with Russia, going back to striking mineral deals and so forth, with the very adversary that's still attacking Ukraine. And that, of course, leaves Europe in a very, very difficult situation, picking up the pieces indeed.
I want to come back to Europe in just a moment. Do you think, on the very point you're just making there, Tobias, that a clue was in that statement post the 3-hour meeting? As some people were saying it was going to last 7 hours, but it only lasted 3 in the end. But Donald Trump said the ball is now in Zelensky's court. And many people who know Donald Trump know what Donald Trump really wants out of this, which is to be seen as the man who brought peace. Many people have been saying, look, if there was even a smidgen of hope that in those 3 hours Donald Trump believed that he had got Putin to agree to something, whether it's a ceasefire or a peace deal, he would have wanted to take the credit all by himself. He would not have made a statement that he made, which was, well, now I've done all I can, but it's now down to President Zelensky. He wouldn't have wanted Zelensky to get the credit. He would have wanted to keep the credit to himself. Is that reading a little bit too much into his language?
No, I think that's very fair, and that's the analysis that we now need to conduct, because even Trump would have wanted to take away something from this. His own advisors would say, listen, it's all getting rather tricky here. You made that promise to sort this all out when you came into office. It's clearly not going to happen. The idea that was mooted last week that there would be some form of land swaps or moving of territories and so forth immediately had pushback from European capitals, quite rightly, and of course, Ukraine. And this has left Trump scratching his head saying, how on earth do I get myself out of here? So this, unfortunately, is the bigger picture that we now face. A very possibility that America could be dialing back, not just from Ukraine, but also from Europe. And Europe and America, not on the same page, when the world is getting more.
He's saying something similar to what I've been saying. And that is that the United States needs to step away, maybe put more sanctions on Russia, sell some arms to Ukraine, let the Europeans deal with the problem, and we focus more on the Pacific. Because that's where the game is. If we lose our focus on the Pacific, China is going to get control of the first island chains, and that's going to change the whole dynamic of the Pacific. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the citrus deodorant or the peppermint lavender and tea tree deodorant. This will help to detoxify your body too. So it's dual purpose. Males and females can use this. It's a great deodorant, very high quality, made from essential oils from the Himalayas. A great stack to help with your cardiovascular health and your bone density is D3 and K2. All right, you stack them together. Now, do resistance training, and what this is going to do is that it's going to create the microenvironment to remodel your bone matrix. It takes about 5 years to get denser bone. All right, if you do this regularly, but it does work. In addition, if you take higher doses of D3 and you do light resistance training on joints that you have arthritis, you can remodel those joints within 7 to 9 months and mitigate, if not eliminate, the osteoarthritis. All right, so you can remodel bone by taking D3 and K2. It's the MK7 molecule. Taking calcium or drink milk, or taking a calcium supplement, it's up to you. I prefer to get my calcium through milk. But D3 and K2 will help to remodel your bone. Super important to prevent osteopenia and osteoporosis. Now, D3 and K2 will also help to pull some calcium depositing around plaque out and reduce further calcium depositing. So it's going to help with your cardiovascular health. Now, if you stack with a bunch of other stuff, you can actually reduce plaque formation and reduce the blockage. I have a cardiovascular box on my store. Take a look at what those supplements are to be able to follow that stack. But this stuff works and it's dual purpose. helps with your cardiovascular system and your bone density. Super important to do. Now, I have gels. I have two types of gels. You have it in a quick dispenser or in a tube form. You use it the same way. All right. And this is a dual purpose. You can use this as an aftershave. If you're not feeling well or someone around you is not feeling well, you can put it on your hands, around your mouth, around your eyes, around your nose, around your ears, lightly coat your nostrils, stays active for 5.5 hours. You can't do that with anything out there like Perel. You can't do that. This is very powerful stuff, all right? You're gonna need this in the fall and in the winter, trust me. But not just that, you can use it as daily skincare. And if you have a cut, an abrasion, or a minor burn, you can put it on that lesion and it'll help to heal it because it keeps it clean. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, get the gels, make sure you have some at work and at home. You never know when you need it. And I also have structural nano silver toothpaste. This will whiten your teeth, freshen your breath, help with the health of your gum line, and reduce inflammation at the gum line. Good oral hygiene is super important, especially in your geriatric years. So go to my store, get this very high quality toothpaste. You can't get anything better than this. There's nothing that you can buy that's better than this. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, get a few tubes of the toothpaste. Now, you may say, well, toothpaste is toothpaste. No, this has structural nanosilver, has no fluoride. Let's continue.
Dangerous, becoming more unstable is not a good place to be.
Tobias, why do you think Putin doesn't seem to be?
So you're looking to grow your business. You don't have time to focus on hiring. I got you. Everyone thinks I've unlocked some new level of discipline.
Putin doesn't seem to be afraid of Donald Trump. Let's not forget that before this meeting was announced, the timeline the deadline, I should say, that Donald Trump had set had just run over. He had set a deadline for Russia to make some moves towards a ceasefire. Otherwise, they would face what he called very strong and possibly catastrophic sanctions. They were postponed because of this meeting. He said in the run-up to this meeting that unless we come out with some sort of ceasefire, if he doesn't get the feeling that Vladimir Putin was serious about bringing an end to this war, this would again result in those harsh sanctions. Well, we finished the meeting, no ceasefire, no agreement at all, and no sanctions. Why have we not seen those materialize?
It has been a curious timeline indeed. You're right to point that out. I attended the NATO summit only a couple of months ago, and it was clear there that Donald Trump seems to be finally getting it, recognizing that Putin was not his friend, could not be trusted, and would pursue further war beyond Ukraine.
The problem with what Trump has is that he's stuck in between two issues. One, he has to be careful that the deep state is always trying to find a way to try to take him down. The other is that he is trying to deal with a very serious problem around the world, but especially with this whole Ukrainian war. And I think deep down inside, he does want to stop the killing. All right? But the thing is that if he tries to stop the killing and tries the ceasefire path, right? You have a national security state and that intelligentsia that are permit bearers that want to take down Russia all the time. That has been going on for decades. So he has to walk a fine line. He's not just trying to find a path for peace between Zelensky and Putin. He's trying to find a path for peace through the intelligentsia of the United States national security state.
If allowed to do so. And then you had this Medvedev spat, if you remember, when he put out, the former president put out a provocative tweet, and Donald Trump said, right, I'm tasking submarines, to the area because this is, looking to it like we're heading towards war. And now we have this courting in Alaska. There's been no strategy. This is the absence of any clarity of direction from America. Secondary sanctions would have been exactly what would have harmed Russia, would have forced Putin to reconcile that he's up against someone. but Trump has blinked, sadly. And bigger picture, there is a 1938 feel to it. I'm sorry to be too dramatic about this, but we are appeasing the bully of gifting 1/5 of Ukraine to a country after it's been invaded. And that is not a good place to be at all. We require America to stand with European allies, to look our enemy in the eyes and not blink. But at the moment, that looks like exactly what we're doing.
Well, let's get this straight. You had a national security state that is aligned with the intelligentsia of the East Coast of the United States that thought that this push by NATO would only cause further decline in regional control of Russia. But because of the feedback loop that they didn't count on, Putin was able to gain some land. And now the national security state is like going, well, wait a minute, we can't have that. NATO should only be expanding. It shouldn't be contracting. We shouldn't be losing land. We should be gaining land, right? So this is the reason why I said that Trump is walking a fine line between a group of people in the United States that are perma bears for Russia, for the Russian fall, right? They want Russia to fall because they want the natural resources, and this goes back decades. I mean, this is all the way back to the beginnings of the Cold War. It's just never changed. It's so obvious when you listen to like CSIS and some of the Hoover Institute and some of these think tanks. They all say the same bullshit. It's all the same thing. Russia bad, NATO good. So they're having a shit fit that Putin actually took some land. Meanwhile, they're not paying attention and looking in the mirror that they're the cause of Putin. NATO expansion is the cause for Putin. Jeffrey Sachs, who was part of the rebooting of the economy for Russia, he tanked the economy. Yet Jeffrey Sachs seems to be on a podcast everywhere telling you how the world really works. He was part of the problem. He was part of the build up of an environment that allowed for Putin to rise. Jeffrey Sachs, the intelligentsia, and the expansion of NATO. But Jeffrey Sachs is going to tell you how things are. Shock therapy, his economic shock therapy created Putin. But the intelligentsia thought shock therapy would crush Russia, move them towards a capitalistic society, a democracy. All those state assets will be sold off and they will be on the free market. Goldman Sachs could come in and start buying it on pennies on the dollar. That's what the national security state is. Now, you add in, well, we got an awful lot of nuclear weapons aimed at us. Then it creates this whole really complex issue. The national security state literally has constructed Damocles over our heads day in and day out for decades. And no one talks about it. No one wants to really, wake up, rub their eyes and say, you know what? At any given moment, the world could go up in flames and have mega deaths. At any given moment. A miscalculation or hatred for a particular country or leader or a rogue actor, and boom, the whole world is up in flames. We should never have ever allowed the national security state to have that level of power over our heads. And to bring insult to injury, they're using our tax-paying dollars to do it.
European leaders have rallied in support of Ukraine. That's not unusual. They have rallied behind President Zelensky, saying that the next move has to be sit down with President Putin. However, former Defence Secretary Sir Ben Wallace was on Times Radio Breakfast earlier today, and he was telling Callum McDonald that the UK simply can't contribute troops to any kind of war effort.
I've seen the virtualization market is evolving quickly. Increasing costs and lock-in are driving companies to reevaluate virtualization strategy.
Kind of war effort.
I've seen trailed in the media the last few days, in the British media, that British troops are on standby to go to Ukraine if the deal is done. What troops? With who? We're completely overstretched. We're completely hollowed out. The SDSR, that was a big fanfare a few months ago, came with no extra money at all. No real solid change to the British Armed Forces will happen towards the end of the decade.
A guest of ours previously on the show, Stephanie Baps, formerly of NATO, said that NATO needs to step up and forget America and as an ally. But as we hear there from Ben Wallace, is NATO and European armies, are they up to scratch to step up and replace the US?
Well, I mean, a lot of points there. If were a deal to be secured, were there a ceasefire in place, it's then important that the two protagonists are then kept apart, and that's usually done by a third force, the United Nations sanctioned capability, and that's where Britain would definitely put its hand up and say we will participate in that. Ben Wallace is right to then turn to the state of our own armed forces at the moment, and I'm afraid the Conservatives are as much to blame as anybody else. We've allowed our defence posture to erode over the last 3 decades, and now we're facing, as I suggested, a very dangerous era of uncertainty. We need to upgrade. But absolutely, there would be a collective effort of which Britain would participate. It's jumping the gun to think that we're going to immediately start tasking troops, boots on the ground. There's an awful lot of work to be done. And as we've just been discussing, I don't think we're going to get anywhere close to that, because I think this is going to fail spectacularly. I could be wrong, but right now, all the signs is that Putin will continue doing what he's doing. He was even firing missiles during the actual Alaska summit, and America, Donald Trump, is going to retreat.
Tobias, thank you for your time. Always good to speak.
I agree with him. I think Donald Trump failed at the summit, and I'm a supporter of Trump. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Get the heirloom barley. This helps to detoxify your body, bring down inflammation, and help to soak up free radicals through superoxide dismutase. Super important. By bringing down inflammation, it's helping your immune system, helping with your joints if you have joint pain, and it will help with your vascular system. By bringing down inflammation at the vascular system, you're reducing the chances of plaque buildup. Gladiator barley has all of the benefits of heirloom barley, but you have one additional benefit, and that is when you do resistance training, it's going to help to build muscle. Take Gladiator barley, super important, and by building up muscle, you're reducing that atrophy, and you're helping to control your A1C levels. A lot of people don't realize as your protein consumption goes down, when you lose muscle mass, you start to have problems with being able to control A1C levels. So to kind of reverse this, improve your BMI, lose weight, reduce the adipose tissue, right? And build muscle. Increase your consumption of protein. Super important. Now, Boomer Boost. Boomer Boost has 68 nutrients. It has a very comprehensive profile compound. It's a powder. You mix it with soft foods, filter water, or smoothie, or even with milk. I take it with hummus, but take it every day. And what you're going to notice is that you're going to have a lot of energy. It'll help to rev up your metabolism. You're going to be able to lose weight if you want to lose weight. You're going to have a steady burn of energy. You're going to be able to focus. You're going to have better brain function. Your cardiovascular system will improve. So, and musculature, it'll help with your musculature. Super important to take. All right. Take it every day. Now, for the ones that want to lose weight, the best way to do it is to do some calorie restriction and take this in the morning or during lunchtime in the afternoon. And that's your meal. You mix it with soft foods, and that's your meal for your breakfast or for your lunch, not both. And have a balanced diet every day and do working out, do some cardio, do resistance training, balancing, and stretching exercises. All 4 of those are very important. And by doing that, you're going to lose weight safely, and you're going to have a steady burn of energy. So get the Boomer Boost, super important. Stack them together, either the Boomer Boost and the Gladiator barley or the Boomer Boost and the heirloom barley, and it's going to improve your A1C levels even more. And lastly, get the C60. C60, you can get it in a 2 ounce, a 4 ounce, or an 8 ounce configuration. You can get it in extra virgin olive oil, MCT coconut oil, or avocado oil. C60 is a very potent antioxidant that's going to soak up free radicals, help to boost up the energy levels in your cell and in your tissues. It's going to help with the mitochondrial health. It's going to bring down inflammation at the vascular level. That's going to reduce the chances of building up plaque, bring down the stress in the neurons, help with the health of the mitochondria in the neurons. That's going to help with neurotransmitters and with neurons that are working properly and that have less stress. Those neurons are going to have better neuroplasticity. The myelin sheaths are going to be more intact. You're going to be able to think clearly. You're going to have better cognition. Your memory will be improved. You're going to get rid of that brain fog. So there's lots of benefits of taking C60. And the key here is to bring down stress in the cell and soak up those free radicals. And by doing that on a regular basis, by taking a teaspoon a day, preferably on an empty stomach, but taking a teaspoon a day every day, you're going to notice that your endocrine system is improving, you're having less stress in your body, your immune system is improving, your brain function is improving, and you're slowing down the aging process. You actually will look younger, and you'll have more energy because your mitochondria is healthier. So go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the C60. So that is my take on the summit. All right. I think it was a failure. Many of the people out there that are commenting, even though that they're anti-Trumpers, are saying the same thing. I think Fox News assessment of Trump's summit with Putin in Alaska, I think Fox News is putting lipstick on a pig. Trump failed, and Putin won on with this. Now, I understand that Trump has a lot of different variables that are going on, but this was a failure. It was all show and nothing to show for it. And guess what? It cost the American taxpayers money that we should not have been paying for. Thank you for listening, and have a nice day.